button. And we're live. Mr. West.
Mr. Rogan.
Pleasure to have you here in person. Doing it on Skype was fun and it was nice. And you are, to this day, the only podcast I've ever done on Skype.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But I had to talk to you. If you couldn't get down here, there's got to be a way. So it was nice to be able to do it that way. But much nicer to see you here in person.
And much better to be here in person. And actually, what's responsible for being here in person is that I wouldn't actually come all this huge distance, even to be on your show, unless you paid me lots of money, of course, which you're not prepared to do. But because I have this conference coming up at the end of the week called CPAC, which I'm surprised you didn't know about, Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge, which is the end of this week. For those living in Southern California, you might want to take a look at the website.
Yeah, tell everybody where's that and what is it about?
It's Rancho Mirage, which is a great name. It means there is no ranch, but Rancho Mirage, which is somewhere near Palm Springs, and it is about exactly what it says: Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge, and it questions, to begin with, the whole how shall I say, the whole scenario, the standard scenario about what causes precession, which is supposedly a kind of a wobble of the Earth caused by nobody knows exactly what. And the counter theory is that it isn't that. It's that there is a dwarf star of some sort orbiting the sun, upsetting the balance of the celestial mechanical balance of it. And that makes a difference. You say, well, what's the difference? One way or another, there's precession. It does make a difference, actually, in the big picture, because it means that our solar system basically conforms with all of the other solar systems, which mostly are dual in nature. Sirius, for example, has the dwarf star that circles around it, Sirius B, that's responsible for all sorts of measurable phenomena. So it starts off from there, but then the ancient knowledge comes in, because precession, and this is a big mystery, precession seems to be a factor of virtually every ancient society, be it sophisticated, a la China and India, South America, Mesoamerica, or so-called primitive, a word I hate to use. It simply means unintellectualized or not expressed in coherent Western philosophy, for whatever that's worth. But precession is a known fact, discovered actually a long time ago. You'd think by now it would be common knowledge and everybody would teach it in school, which is a sort of a joke.
It's kind of interesting that people don't teach it, right? It is a very bizarre thing that it's so prominent in ancient cultures and ancient society that they literally mapped this out, this 26,000-year cycle, this wobble of the Earth, and that we rarely talk about it, ever.
No, because it upsets the notion that there's a knowledge of this going back to ancient times, presupposes that there's a very advanced observational astronomy dating at a time when supposedly people were still living in trees. So this is actually a big deal, though, hence the Conference on Precession. And the ancient knowledge comes into it because understanding that there is a highly sophisticated scientific understanding that goes back not just to ancient Egypt itself, but far thousands and thousands millennia beyond, upsets what is effectively the reigning religion of today, except it doesn't call itself a religion. It calls itself science, which is based supposedly on reason. It's not. None of those things are true. It's not based on science, and science is not based upon reason. Maybe we'll get time to
Well, some sciences, but archaeology in particular is very rigid in its ideas, and a lot of it is based on the professors that have written books and that teach these ideas, and they don't want to let them go. And when new knowledge is discovered that challenges those ideas, they fight it rigorously, even if it's knowledge like the stuff that you exposed with Dr. Robert Schoch, which was the water erosion on the Sphinx, which we were talking about before the podcast, which is one of the best pieces of evidence, because the last time there was rainfall, heavy rainfall in the Nile Valley was, what was it, 9,000 BC? Is that what it was?
They debate it, but it's way before the beginning of dynastic Egypt, and then it's a question of how old or when those rains fell. Because interesting bit of thing here that I'm now at liberty to to relate publicly. Originally, I wasn't. When I first got Shock over to Egypt, which is another 2-hour podcast in itself, the history of getting Shock interested in this stuff. And when he finally agreed, very hesitantly and very skeptically, to come along because he had to see the evidence for himself, and I scraped together a bit of money to bring him over, and we got into the Sphinx enclosure. I don't think it was got in legally. I think we bribed our way in very early in the morning. Well, in Egypt, everything is possible. And bribed our way in, and he walked into the Sphinx enclosure. Actually, when we get that up on the screen, you'll see the level of the water, or the extent of the weathering, of the water weathering. And Shock looked at it, and everybody else walks into the Sphinx enclosure and has this shock of recognition in the presence of this fabulous work of sacred sculpture, in fact, of sacred sculpture. And Shock looked, but Shock is a no, that's not it. We're way back, Jamie, right to the beginning, first slides. And Shock, everybody else sees the Sphinx as a work of art. Shock sees the rocks. He's a geologist. And he back like this. And he said, wow, these rocks look like they're hundreds of thousands of years old. And he said, don't quote me on that. Because that's, of course, absolute heresy, that the most spectacular sculpture on earth should be, tens of thousands of years. Actually, even the 4,500 years that it's associated with do not conform with anybody's idea of how civilization developed. This goes back to of why the academic, I call it the quackademic establishment, is so passionately defends the old paradigm the way that it does, because the reigning paradigm, the reigning religion today, which is not acknowledged as religion, is that this is the Church of Progress, and its credo, just like the virgin birth is the credo of early Christianity, or present-day Christianity, not that they know what they're talking about. The credo of the Church of Progress is, A, we are the most sophisticated human beings that have ever lived on the face of the planet, with our hydrogen bombs and our nerve gas and our striped toothpaste and our Disneylands. We're the best that ever was. And secondly, that progress, as it's called, goes in a straight line from primitive cavemen up to ourselves. And when it becomes self-evident that in very, very ancient times they had knowledge of precession, which is an incredible thing to, it's almost unimaginable that it happens through careful observation, because the sun, I don't know if all of the audience will know what this is, so maybe it's worth talking about. The sun, if you look at the spring equinox now, it's in the sun is rising against the last bits of Pisces. It may even be in the earliest stages of Aquarius. And gradually the sun precesses, that's to say, it goes backwards around the zodiac in a cycle that takes canonically 25,920 years to make a complete circle. What this means is that it actually takes 72 years, precisely, for the sun to precess 1 degree. So this is nothing. Who's going to be sitting there for 72 years watching the track of the sun in a cycle that takes 26,000 years to go around?
And observe that there's a discrepancy, and have to write it down and pass that information down.
And then why should they care? It's somehow or another deeply connected with the civilization of that time and with our civilization. And when you look at the numbers involved, this is another hours of conversation, actually.
Right.
The 72 and the 73 are significant numbers in practically all of the developed numerologically based societies. So in Egypt, Set, who's the bad guy, derivative, probably Satan is derived from Set. He's the bad guy, but he's also a great god. That is to say, the gods are not gods in any superstitious fashion. They represent the embodiments of cosmic principles. So, Set is he who fixes spirit in matter. And the whole basis of an esoteric of any esoteric doctrine, including most of the religions that are around even today in their depraved forms, the objective of any esoteric discipline is to free ourselves individually and collectively from our imprisonment in matter. This is the quest for immortality. And so, in some sense or another, that processional cycle is very important, and the numbers are important. In the myth, which again we don't have time for, but Osiris is the good king. Actually, this is all very carefully expounded, very brilliantly, in fact, in the Hamlet myth, which becomes Shakespeare's Hamlet, and then in The Lion King, in Disney's Lion King, in the movie especially, which is really pretty brilliant. Anyway, Set is the good king who is beloved by his people, and Set is his wicked brother, his evil brother, who is determined to unseat him and steal his sister wife Isis while he's at it. Anyway, Set sets a trap for Osiris, and it's Set and his 72 followers. So 72 is this number associated with time, and the 72 to 73 is a very significant ratio, actually, which pervades the philosophies of as I said, of all of the esoteric civilizations. So all of this stuff, instead of being the kind of ask a quackademic, the same guy you were talking about earlier, who still thinks the Sphinx is weathered by sand, ask one of those what ancient myth is about. They say, oh, well, it's just a fabrication written by primitive people who are trying to explain the mysteries of the universe. It's the other way around. The primitive people are the ones with the PhDs. And back then, they not only did they understand these scientific, these astronomical facts, but they orchestrated their whole civilization around those facts. And the deeper you get into this, the more miraculous the extent of ancient knowledge becomes.
Now, what is the mainstream explanation when they talk about the prevalence of the number 72 and their understanding of the precession of the equinoxes? Do they address it at all? Like, how do they sort of explain how they knew about this 26,000-year cycle?
There's a very quick answer to that, actually, for a change. No. They don't explain.
They don't.
They just ignore it.
Is it sort of like the Parthenon, the Acropolis? You know, which one? The Acropolis is the building, and the Parthenon's the structure, right? Is that what it is?
No, both are temples, both are buildings.
But what is what's the base? The base is the one that they don't explain, right? They just go, well, we don't really exactly. That's the gigantic, enormous base, the huge stones that the Acropolis is built on, right?
I don't know.
Which one is the Acropolis? I always screw those up.
Acropolis is the one on top.
Right. Okay. See, the Parthenon is what they're built on. This the base structure, or whatever it is, the bottom area.
I don't know, actually. I've never really looked that deeply into it, other than that there's a friend of mine who's worked with the proportions and the sophisticated proportions of the Parthenon, and it shows actually that it's as minutely orchestrated as anything in Egypt, even though it's much later than Egypt. But
much later than Egypt, but no one knows who built it, and no one knows why they built it. It's one of those weird ones where it's not really described in the text, and the Acropolis is built upon it. At least that's been explained to me by Greek historians, by people who understand Greek history. They just really don't understand where it came from.
Well, I believe that's true, except that I think it's pretty certain that it's not of Egyptian age, although if you're talking about gigantic paving stones at the bottom of it, as I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
But whenever you see those gigantic stones, that's a pretty good indication of an earlier period of construction. As at Baalbek, they have these monolithic 1,200-ton blocks that they think the Romans put in there.
And that's in Lebanon, right?
That's Lebanon, yeah. So there's a ton of this kind of indirect evidence, and when you put it all together, there's enough of a picture there so that it overthrows the basis. As I said, what's important about it is, in one sense, who cares? In another sense, it overthrows the supposed scientific basis of the Church of Progress, that we're the most sophisticated people that ever were, and we can do whatever we please with this once glorious planet of ours without worrying about it, because we're the best and everyone before us was primitive.
Well, there's a lot of new evidence now since you started your work particularly all that nuclear glass that they're finding that corresponds with meteor impacts throughout Europe and Asia, and that's somewhere around the end of the Ice Age, really in the same sort of time period when they do core samples, and they find this nuclear glass. It's all at around 10,000 plus years ago. That kind of stuff really starts to indicate that we're looking at possibly an event that might have shaped human history, or a reset of a large percentage of the people on this planet, where civilization in many areas was all but wiped out, and then they had to rebuild again.
Yeah, this is coming to the fore now. There's a lot of evidence for these, I think it's the tektites they're called. Schock thinks that they are the result of a gigantic CME, a coronal mass ejection, giant solar flares. And there's a lot of evidence for this. Actually, I don't know if we get into talking about it here. I will at CPAC for sure. Schock will be at CPAC. Anyway, it's unlikely that it's actually a nuclear blast, because it would be inconceivable at least by our standards, a man-made nuclear blast. Although, when you go into the Hindu texts, and I think it's the Upanishads where they describe what sounds like, it's described as a battle of the gods, but for all the world, it does sound like a nuclear conflagration. A human-made nuclear conflagration. I don't think anybody knows enough to say what it is, other than that story is in there. And
right.
In fact, because I'm a writer by trade, I'm very interested in the way that language is used, and so myth is one of the principal misleading words that, if you look in the dictionary, the first meaning that it gives for myth is a lie. You always talk about the myth, Mythbusters, ghost. That myth is a lie, but the ancients didn't see myth as a lie. What myth actually is, when you get into it fairly deeply, is the interplay of cosmic principles described as drama rather than in mathematics. So once you get a good look, this is an extraordinary but opaque book called Hamlet's Mill by Giorgio de Santillana and Herta von Deckend, who were historians of science at MIT, which is about as respectable as credentials can be. So as soon as myth is understood as having both a rigorous scientific as well as philosophical and spiritual base, the whole understanding of myth turns around. And you see, for example, in Hamlet, in Shakespeare's Hamlet, which is based upon a Danish folk tale, which then becomes, quite brilliantly actually, the Lion King in the Disney film. You see how the myth, in other words, you could decode the Osiris-Isis-Horus myth as pure science, and you might call it as spiritual or as sacred science. And at the same time, it's a ripping good story when you put it that way, as story, because then everybody can understand it, even if they don't understand it, or even if they can't articulate what they've understood. The power of the story soaks through. So myth is actually, the more you know about it, in my case it's not that much, but at least it's better than nothing. The more you know about it, the more amazing mythology becomes, that they should have been able to put together these complex, hierarchical, esoteric concepts in a way that resonates as a story. Otherwise, insofar as, our own cosmology is next to impossible to understand unless you're a cosmologist and schooled in the abstract mathematics that make the thing work. The mathematics is absolutely beyond me, but some of my astrophysicist friends can explain it to me in such a way that I understand, but it still doesn't have any emotional impact.
So essentially what you're saying is that they didn't have the sort of scientific discipline that we have today. They didn't understand a lot of the things that we know today as far as the way academics or scientists relay information about space or about cosmology. So what they did is they combined theater and story with the actual facts that they knew. So that was the way they would relay this stuff, and that's the way that stuff would be passed on, that information would be passed on through these stories. But in those stories was an actual history of the world itself, as far as they knew.
Through that and through symbolism. And this is an infinitely superior way of communicating knowledge, because you don't have to be an expert. It soaks into your bones in such a way that it directs personally and collectively people's behaviors. And it's my firm conviction that this is why Egypt lasted as a coherent civilization, even in its dynastic form, for 3,500 years, and our lunatic societies coming apart at the seams in front of our eyes at 300 years.
I wanted to talk to you about the written history of Egypt and the hieroglyphic history of the pharaohs. Because I remember, I think it was from Magical Egypt 1, you were talking about the historical record, like what they have written down in the hieroglyphs about the pharaohs, that it goes back far beyond what we think of as the birth of Egypt. You know, with the construction, the Great Pyramid, I believe modern academics put it at 2,500 BC, correct?
Yes.
And you believe that it's possible that Egypt existed as far back as, I think you said 34,000 years?
Well, that's their own, that's the Egyptians' account, not mine.
Right, of course.
As expressed in a stone tablet called the Palermo stone, because it's now in Palermo, Italy, and in a very fragmentary papyrus called the Turin papyrus, which is now in Turin. And both of these documents, one is a stone stela and the other is a papyrus, tell or recount long periods when Egypt was ruled first by the Netcheru, which means the gods themselves, which I take to mean fully realized divine human beings. In other words, human beings that have attained, that have passed the test of the quest for immortality, who are in effect, they've outsmarted death, or they've outdeveloped death.
Why do you believe this?
Because their works speak for themselves, as it were, and the level of the. Now we're talking going back even to dynastic Egypt, because the temples themselves and the level of art involved, particularly in the sculpture, is such that standard, I'd say genius is rare enough, but standard human genius doesn't seem to apply to these incredible constructions. And the academics simply dismiss it out of hand as really very talented exponents of a barbaric and primitive understanding of the cosmos. Leading my trips there, which I do, as you know, a few times a year. Next one coming up, by the way, anybody listening in.
How could people go on one of those trips with you?
Oh, it's very easy. You pay.
Okay. Where do they find you, though?
On my website.
JohnAnthonyWest.com?
Yeah, on the website or my email, jawsphinx@aol.com.
Oh, you messed up. You gave out your email. That's a disaster.
Is it?
My people, horrible people. They're going to send you naked pictures, for sure.
Oh, not of themselves, I hope, but
I'm familiar with the term dick pic.
I am now.
Yeah, there you go. So your thoughts are that these people that lived 34,000 years ago were incredibly advanced,
yes.
Like much further advanced than we are today.
Which doesn't take much, but
right.
When you understand what's involved. But
yeah, I know what you're saying, but I mean, we're pretty damn advanced compared to people a few hundred years ago, correct?
In certain ways we are, but
right.
we still can't. We couldn't and wouldn't build the Cathedral of Chartres.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody alive, to the best of my knowledge, who could produce a building that is based upon sacred principles that even comes close to.
You mean sacred geometry?
And sacred, even that. I mean, a few people really know quite a bit about this, but they couldn't design Chartres. And that's 12th century.
Was
Anyway,
what was it about Egypt in that time in particular that, in your opinion, I mean, obviously there's a lot of speculation going on here because there's so little evidence from 34,000 years ago, but what is it about that area that you think developed people at such an incredibly high level? Because unless there's more evidence to be found, there doesn't seem to be any parallels anywhere else in the world like that one spot.
actually, there's a fairly simple explanation for that, for a change, because most of the stuff is so complicated. But just to go back a bit to the rule by the Necheru, the gods themselves, and the names of those rulers are given and the length of time that they reigned. And then there's another group of
But the line of time is incredible, right?
Well, this is where we're getting the 34,000, 36,000 BC from.
Yeah.
Because you add the times up. The Turin Papyrus has a similar thing of the reign, rule of the Necheru, and the rule by that's called the Shemsuhor, the followers or the followers of the companions of Horus. And again, the names are given and the regnal years. And when you add those all up together, you get around 36,000 BC.
But I'm sorry to interrupt you, but weren't some of the pharaohs, didn't they live hundreds of years?
There's no evidence for that.
But wasn't it written that they did?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what those dates are, actually. I've not actually deeply researched them. I get those figures from Schwaller de Lubix, the great genius with the unpronounceable name, who put together the whole interpretation of symbolist Egypt, from which my work is derived. I mean, I regard myself as Schwaller's Boswell, making his basically impenetrable work accessible to
dummies like me.
No, smart guys like you, not dummies like politicians and quackademics. No.
So, but when you're talking about 34,000 years, I mean, the average person today lives to be about 80 years. You're talking about an incredible number of pharaohs then.
Yeah, you are. Yes,
but and so all that is depicted?
Apparently the names are given. I get that from Schwaller, from the one long chapter he wrote called the chronology, chorography he calls it. There's not the word for it, but the chronology of Egypt, where he's looking to back up from a scholarly point of view, from the scholarly argument, that the Egyptians knew what they were talking about when they were assigning these long reigns, that these are not fictitious. This is not made-up history in order to, fool the people who couldn't read the hieroglyphs anyway. Only the scribes could read the hieroglyphs. So Schwaller wrote this very long and thoughtful and scholarly chapter. And then at the very end of it, this throwaway line, and as of course the Great Sphinx of Giza has been weathered, shows unmistakable signs of aquatic erosion. And that was my little epiphany, because I picked up on that and said, wow, the rest of this isn't science, but that's geology. And if the geologists can be, will agree that this cannot have taken place since 2,500 BC, when the Sphinx is supposedly built, this will upset the whole paradigm. All of civilization will have to be, of our view of civilization, will have to be rethought. And that's began this long, now 4-decade-long quest to find somebody to back it up. And we're now, my sense of it is, closing in on beating down the opposition. And this will be another thing, actually, in fact, I'll probably be talking about at CPAC, but probably with, how shall I say, a little bit more politely than I feel it necessary to talk about here. Because I'm here with you. And that is riffing on a line that probably everybody who tunes into this is familiar with. Victor Hugo, the French poet, novelist, a dramatist of the 19th century. Actually, France's most popular poet of the 19th century was Victor Hugo. And it was Victor Hugo who wrote the famous line, "There's one thing stronger than all the armies in the world, and that is an idea whose time has come." You know that line, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows that line. But what Victor Hugo didn't think of, or if he did, he didn't express it, was that the second strongest thing in the world is an idea whose time has not yet gone. And since it is a matter of record that all of the armies in the world, be they military, economic, financial, cultural, agricultural even, wherever there's a paradigm, there's an army devoted to protecting that paradigm. And this is where we stand now, that the idea whose time has come only comes when the armies of the second strongest thing in the world are beaten down, are beaten into the ground, and somebody breaches the portcullis to the ivory tower where all of these guys live. And this is a particular interest to me because I am a scholar by default, but a satirist by nature. And really my whole adult life has been devoted to proving a vision that I had at the age of 13 or so, that I was born into a lunatic asylum. And at the age of about 19, it was a very uncomfortable place to live where everybody called it progress. And I thought it was crazy. And at that age, about 19 or so, I knew what I wanted to do, which was to be the little boy who said the emperor has no clothes, and to prove to everybody's satisfaction that indeed the emperor has no clothes and it's a lunatic asylum. The end result took me a couple of decades to realize that. It was that in real life what happens is that, no, the people all done say, whoa, look, the emperor has no clothes, and everybody lives happily ever after. What happens is that the disgraced emperor goes back to his palace and regroups the empire, and at the end all of the forces of empire conspire to prove to everyone that the emperor's clothes are real, but it's the child who's imaginary.
We were talking about this before the podcast, and this is a really fascinating aspect of this discussion. Was when I first became aware of your work was that Charlton Heston narrated documentary about the aging of the Sphinx, the mystery of the Sphinx, which I believe was on NBC. What I thought was shocking was when Dr. Shock was speaking to that Egyptologist who was saying, what evidence is there of a culture that existed 7,000 years before ancient Egypt? There's no evidence. He's like, there is no, and he was laughing. And the way he was doing, there was so much ego involved in what he was saying. I was like, wow, this is not how I would picture an Egyptologist laughing. Well, that got me curious. I started getting into it. Why would anybody think like that? And then I realized, oh, these guys write books and they teach lectures and they teach classes based on this information that they're teaching, and now this information has been shown to be not true anymore. When Dr. Shock was showing this water erosion, he was saying that this was all before the discovery of Göbekli Tepe. And once they discovered Göbekli Tepe, now they know that there is a sophisticated structure capable of massive stone circles that was 12,000 years ago at least, when it was intentionally buried. So it could have easily been several thousand years old then. We don't know. But we know at least 12,000 years ago someone was capable of incredible design and incredible stone structures with three-dimensional animals carved into these stone structures, which is very sophisticated. Now, has that guy been talked to since then, and has he amended his position on it?
As far as I know, he hasn't. And I know Lehner reasonably well. We're civil to each other. And it won't be long now. I mean, he's one of the generals of the in the army of the idea whose time has not yet gone, and his time is coming up pretty shortly.
Does he address Göbekli Tepe now? I mean, because his whole position was there was no civilization. What evidence is there? Well, now that you have this evidence, what does he say? Well, maybe
I haven't actually spoken to him, and I don't know if anyone has. I see him in Egypt every once in a while. I don't know if anyone has, and I ran into him fairly recently. I just said hello, and I don't think I'd necessarily want to bring it up with him off the record. I'd rather have him with the cameras on us,
right,
and just see what happens. But
right.
Otherwise, he's a dead duck.
But it's just so he seems to be just clinging to this idea because he can. Like mainstream academia hasn't accepted this predating of the Sphinx, or also the difference in the structures, like the difference in the construction methods that were used. One of the more fascinating things that you sort of highlighted in your Ancient Egypt series, Magical Egypt, which is fantastic, and I highly recommend it to anybody who is even remotely curious of this. You will be sucked in an incredible way. It got to the point my wife was walking by the TV. She's like, "Jesus Christ, you watching Egypt again?" And I'm like, "It's like 6 discs. It goes on
8.
forever." 8. So there's a clear distinction between the older methods of construction and the newer methods. They use different methods.
Yeah.
And it's really obvious to someone like me who's not even I don't know anything about it. But you could see the difference. And also that these older structures were below the newer structures. Like you had to dig down to get them.
That's right. Yes.
Like the fact that they don't address that, the fact that that's like they want to lump this all into the same people is kind of crazy.
It is, but as long as they can get away with it, they will continue to get away with it. As I said, the second strongest thing in the world is the idea whose time has not yet gone, and anybody who doesn't, let's say, between myself and my colleagues who are all in this, let's say, the quest to demonstrate that the advanced civilization existed in the very distant past, which is, in my case, in other cases not necessarily, but in mine, it's because that opens the door in and of itself. It doesn't affect the price of eggs. But on a much more profound philosophical level, once it's understood that understanding that civilization goes back way much, much further, leads to the understanding and the acceptance that our role, our destiny as human beings is to achieve immortality. This is as simple as that. Otherwise, it's just a head trip. In other words, if it's not understood that we have a role to play in this grand cosmic scheme, there's no civilization possible.
What do you mean by that? Our goal is to achieve immortality. Do you mean as individuals, or do you mean in what way?
That we arrive at a level of consciousness that is not subject to the death of the physical body. All of religion is based upon that. All of the stories of the saints and the rishis and the masters and so on is based upon, all of it is based upon their experiences that have led them to this understanding. If it's just a head trip, it's no good. It has to be part of your very being. The purpose of sacred art and of sacred music, when it works, is to communicate, even if only momentarily and fragmentarily, this understanding that there's something else. And speaking from my own personal experiences, I've never gone through a full-blown mystical experience, but I've had lots of these moments, particularly in Egypt, in a long study, and these moments in Egypt where there's this sudden realization that the world as it manifests to our faculties, our normal faculties, is not the only world. There's something else beyond that, which was understood a lot better in those days than now. And actually, funnily enough, I forgot to mention this, but I don't know if you know this. I've been spent the last couple of years sort of sidetracked from my regular work, working on a book written by a friend of mine, good friend, who was not a writer, so I helped him with the editing and contributed to it. And this is maybe the definitive book on NDEs. You know what those are, right?
Near-death experience.
Near-death experiences. He was a Christian pastor, a rare guy who actually lived what he preached, named David Solomon. And he had collected all of this material, a huge amount of material, that he was trying to systematize, because this is now, it's certainly not a common experience, but there are like 5,000 verifiable accounts of people who have been clinically dead and who have been revived, usually through modern methods, because now one of the reasons why it's now so common, and before it was reserved for the saints, the great saints and the mystics, that modern medicine has improved to such an extent that if you get to these people quickly enough, any number of people who are clinically dead for X number of minutes, not 2 days, but minutes, sometimes more extended period than that, come back with these tales of this realm beyond that of the senses, a realm of higher consciousness. Basically what it is, what they've experienced is grace. In Christian terms, it's grace. It's a moment, and they come back transformed. They come back convinced that everything that they were doing before is either nonsense or unimportant, and they often come back with a mission, even though they don't have the schooling, let's say. They don't understand philosophically or spiritually what they've experienced. They know what they've experienced, and they laugh at the debunkers who are saying it's all hallucination of the brain, dying brain. This is all garbage. What they've experienced, and David put these together in a systematic fashion. And then, as he'd collected all this material, and I was telling him, he's a good friend. He financed our trip to Göbekli Tepe 5-6 years ago. And he started losing his balance, and he was a Tai Chi guy who knows a lot about balance, also a bonsai master and a Christian pastor, unusual guy. Mm. And he started losing his balance, and it wasn't going away, and the doctors finally figured out what was wrong with him. And he had a glioblastoma, something, I forget, something. Do you know what a glioma is? It's a form of brain cancer that is 100% fatal. It's the only thing you have is that you can't determine the timeline. And they gave him something like 10 months to 12 months to live. He actually lived 3 years. And at that point, he had all of this material, and I told him, when he was telling me about it, I said, David, I should write a book. This is really good stuff. The way you're doing it is not like anybody else has ever done. And he said, no, I'm not a writer. I'm just doing this. And then when he found out the diagnosis, then he had a mission, which was to get the book out. But he wasn't a writer, so he drafted me in to put the words in right order. And he lasted just long enough to get the book finished and get it published. And it's really, if this went viral, it could make a difference. He was very good at titles, David. It's called The Dead Saints Chronicles, subtitle, a Zen Journey Through the Christian Afterlife. And it really is an absolutely extraordinary book. And it becomes quite clear when you go through this that what people have experienced is a state of grace that's not all the same. I mean, some people it's more profound and some people less so. But all of these people are unprepared for what they've experienced, and all of them come back transformed. And of course, the quackademics, this is one of the ways they protect themselves. Peer review is one way. And the other is their insistence. Who the hell gave them the right to make the rules from science that apply to science? Or they're scientists, so that gives them the right to make the rules? No, the rules are the rules. And one of the chief ways in which they protect themselves is to insist that anecdotal evidence, personal experience, doesn't count. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't buy a cookbook by someone who's never fried an egg. So these are guys who've never fried a spiritual egg, and these 5,000 accounts are people who've actually been there to this superior realm and come back to talk about it.
No, but you say you haven't had a mystical experience. You mean a psychedelic experience?
No, that I've had, yes.
You've had psychedelic experience.
Yeah, yeah.
Which kind of psychedelic experiences have you had?
Oh, I've done ayahuasca, and I've done, you name it.
Right. So then you've done DMT?
Yes, and I've done not mescaline, but the other one, acid.
Okay.
All
LSD.
of those. No, the experiences come actually from me. As I said, they're not a major. It's not the state of grace that these people are talking about.
You didn't experience the state of grace when you did DMT?
Not quite. No, not compared to what the NDEs.
Can I ask how many times you've done it?
One.
One time. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you do a lot of it?
I don't know.
You got to do a lot of it.
Yeah, maybe.
Did you just dissolve? Did you go to this crazy geometric infinite universe where you're
I didn't.
You didn't get in there then?
I didn't get in there then.
How long are you in town for?
Pardon?
How long are you in town for?
Only till tomorrow.
we're gonna have to make something happen. You gotta go deeper.
Yeah, maybe.
That experience that people are having, a near-death experience,
Yeah.
is mirrored by the same experience. I'm sure you're aware of Dr. Rick Strassman.
Oh yeah, sure.
Sure. I believe actually he was in.
He's on the.
That's right. He's in
I never
Natural
met
Egypt.
him when Chance was doing the.
Brilliant guy, and
Yeah,
so important
I
because
gather.
what he has created by his book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, they did these clinical tests giving people DMT in a clinical setting and at the University of New Mexico. And what they found was these people achieve this incredible state of understanding, a more relaxed vision of the future. They're more confident. Like the idea. I mean, this is also mirrored by some of the Johns Hopkins tests that they've done with people with psilocybin, where people have, they have just a much better outlook about the future. They don't think that this is it, and that whatever happens to them when they're having these trips. And the way Strassman did it is much more intense than most people do it, because they did intravenous doses, which last longer. A typical DMT trip lasts only about 15 minutes, unless you just jump right back in, which is what I usually do. But he gave these people intravenous doses, which to take them just very deep for more than a half an hour. And they all had very similar stories, and similar stories to people that have had near-death experiences. I've had friends that have had near-death experiences, and when they talk about it, it's very similar to the way I've talked to other people that have had DMT trips, where they are in the presence of this divine greatness, this something. So,
That's right.
but that is also a chemical that's produced by the brain. Now, this is where neuroscientists step in and say, well, what you're experiencing is some sort of a hallucination. And they might be right, but it also might be some sort of a chemical gateway that your brain produces. I mean, we really don't know. And that might be the way the soul, quote unquote, air quotes, whatever, but for lack of a better word, transitions to this next stage of life. Now, when the anecdotal evidence that you're talking about is measured up, what's interesting about it is similar accounts over and over and over and over again.
That's right.
The people that can remember things, they remember this incredibly divine experience. But the question becomes, is that experience, and this is something that I've been bouncing around in my head a lot lately, is that experience a hallucination, or is that experience an actual real experience in a divine presence? And does it matter? Because is it the same thing no matter what? If you just think you're experiencing God and divine greatness because you're creating it in your mind versus actually experiencing God and divine greatness, isn't the experience the exact same thing? And is our mind locked into the idea of a physical thing, like this laptop? I can pick it up, I can drop it, I know it has weight, I can touch it, I can measure the width. We can't do that with psychedelic experiences. We can't do that with transcendent experiences. We can't do that with mystical experiences. You can't measure them. You can't put them in a bag and take it home with you. But it might be the same thing. It's entirely possible that this is what many, many ancient cultures experienced as well. That they found the use of psychedelics very early on. And this is also something that you documented in your work. And they documented it very clearly in a lot of the Egyptian work. They had deep understanding and knowledge.
Exactly, Joe. This is one of the important things about the drugs and the NDE experiences. In my view, the NDE experiences more so because there's nothing in the way. There's nothing obstructing it. They're dead,
Right.
And this is where they go. With the drugs, you know you're you. In these experiences. And the problem, interesting, the problem, it's not a problem, it's the wrong word, but with the NDE experiences, I mean, absolutely, Joe Sixpack, everybody, ordinary people, many of them, some of them even atheists, go through this and come back, literally transformed. Their whole lives are changed by it. With the drugs, it really is, for the most part, it's a trip. It doesn't have this, let's say, this lasting transformational value.
It does on some people.
It does sometimes, yes.
Well, the Johns Hopkins study showed that a lot of people, decades later, had a vastly improved quality of life, different outlook on things, and especially when you're dealing with terminally ill patients.
Oh, well.
When they've given it to terminally ill patients, significant lessening of anxiety and fear of death.
Oh, sure, it would be. But the hallucination, this is another scam by the so-called rationalists, who in fact are not. They're this idea that it's a hallucination. And what's a hallucination? And what's its evolutionary value? Why should there be where's the hallucination gene? This is all bullshit. actually. And what it actually is not based upon reason as they promote themselves. What it is actually is the rationalization of their own inner emptiness. They can't handle the fact that there might be something else. And in fact, their whole intellectual lives are consecrated to proving that life is indeed as meaningless as their own.
But is that what it is, or is it they're just trying to look at some sort of give it a critical, objective view and go over all the possibilities? We know that drugs do affect the mind in very strange ways. We know some people take drugs and it completely distorts their reality. Alcohol is a perfect example of that, right?
Yeah.
It's a great drug for distorting reality. You can watch someone get drunk and have a very bizarre version of what they're looking at. There's many drugs that change the way people look at things, like physically, the way they see things.
Yes.
They will hallucinate. They do. So we know that drugs have an effect on people.
That's right.
I mean, it seems rational, though, that a scientist would look at those things and try to find some sort of a scientific explanation for the chemical process that's going on in the mind, the way it's affecting the visual cortex, and the things that the person is, quote unquote, hallucinating.
Underlying that contention, which is not science in and of itself, that is just a hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
That is speculation. And I said what it is based upon is protecting their own vision of the world, which is that the universe is an accident, and anything that is mystical or so-called spiritual is hallucinatory, and they have the answers. And these people, as far as I'm concerned, are more dangerous even than politicians. They are. Put it this way: the Church of Progress is the religion of the emotionally defective, the spiritually dyslexic, and the philosophically depraved. But to put it into other terms, you actually, martial arts master I studied with briefly, used to say in his Japanese accent, if you want happiness in this crazy world, you do not talk about moonbeams to the blind, or moonbeams to the blind, music to the deaf, and you absolutely do not talk about sex to eunuchs. They just get angry, and this is what you're dealing with when you're dealing with these intellectually based scientists. These are spiritual, emotional, and philosophical eunuchs, and it's no surprise when they behave the way they do. Who's surprised? Who's surprised when the eunuchs snigger behind the sultan's back, and deride his passions? The problem is that with our Church of Progress, when the eunuchs take over the palace and call their terrible disability reason, then the empire's cooked.
You sound like a person who's been deeply in the trenches against academics for years. You sound like a bitter man, John Anthony West.
No, I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter. I'm just realistic. I know what's involved from being in the trenches. I know what's involved in fighting this particular battle, which I've been engaged in all of these decades.
Particularly yours, because you've been dealing with archaeologists that are trying to refute evidence.
They're all just as bad as each other. What I bring to the table that my colleague Graham Hancock was an excellent writer, and some of the others who are very brilliant people, Rupert Sheldrake is also a very good friend and a very good scientist. What they are not is satirists by nature, and I am.
Now, let's go back to this idea that human beings need to fulfill immortality, or that is our ultimate destiny, to fulfill immortality. What do you mean by that exactly? Because if there is an afterlife, right, if we do die and then we go to this other place that people are seeing in these near-death experiences, why do we have to do anything? Why can't we just sit around and wait for our physical meat body to stop working and then transcend?
Well, this gets addressed in David's book, in the Dead Saints Chronicles, because it's our job to transcend. In other words, if we don't do anything, well, something happens to us. And again, here's where the near-death experiences get interesting, because almost none of them are negative. What happens to the real evil monster people that are out there in this world? I mean, does Dick Cheney go to heaven? gee, if he dies, I don't want to be there.
That would be hilarious.
That would-
Imagine if you get to heaven, you're like, Dick fucking Cheney's up here. You got to be kidding me,
Well,
man.
they-
I should have done so much more.
I mean, he's in the special waterboarding division where they have.
Well, maybe
But-
he just, realizes it.
No, but seriously, this is the purpose. You'd never know it from listening to these guys. This is the purpose of religion. It's a practice. It's not something you believe in. It's something that you do. And if you don't do it, you don't, unless you go through an NDE, and you come back and you start doing it in one way or another. But it's my own personal conviction is that unless enough people are doing this and getting somewhere with it, it's not as though everyone's going to become enlightened. They probably aren't. Again, going deep into the whole theories of reincarnation and return and so on, which is part of Egypt and part of all of the Eastern cultures of reincarnation. No, the chances are you don't make it in one lifetime. But these things, let's say, there's a report card. There's a divine report card where these things are measured. I mean, Jesus says, insofar as, the Bible is a scholarly morass, and I usually try to avoid using it as evidence for things because it's so open to interpretation and it's so convoluted to begin with, and who knows what's original to it and what isn't. But, many are called, few are chosen. But those who are called, who do their work or who try to do their work, reap the benefit of that on an internal level that the academics can't measure and don't want to measure and don't believe can be measured. But somebody with a presence is very different from somebody without any presence at all. You see that in the world around you as you go.
Yeah, I want to bring you back around, though, because I'm still confused. What do you mean by it's our goal to achieve immortality? Like, what do you mean by that? Do you mean like the physical body no longer dies? And do you believe that, like, whatever I read, I do not remember what I read, but what I read about the earliest depictions of the pharaohs, that they lived an extraordinary length of time, similar to like Noah. Like Noah in the Bible was 600 years old when he built the ark, correct?
Something like that.
Something like that. And that this is a common thing. And now, is this because the way we think of time, they had a different interpretation of it, and what 600 years is to us is not 600 years to them? Is it like in the Quran when they talk about 72 virgins? When the expression 72 virgins is not really 72. What 72 virgins means, well, it's interesting because it's 72 again.
That's right.
What it means is a large, it's like a shitload, like someone saying a shitload. You'll have 72 virgins in heaven, like, oh, whoa, what am I going to do with all them? It's just a large number. It's the actual, it's not the actual number 72, it's just sort of a euphemism for a large number.
That's one of the theories of all of those different strange numbers in the Bible, and I don't know any better than anyone else. As far as I know, the pharaohs lived ordinary lifespans, and of course there's no evidence, physical evidence of the pharaohs, the Necheru, when the divine rulers ruled, and the Shemsuhor when they ruled. There's none of that, and we simply don't know. The Tibetans have accounts, if you want to believe the Tibetans, and I tend to, I don't see why they should lie, of great lamas who live several hundred years and go when they choose to. I don't know, simple as that. And actually, you might say it's no more than kind of mental. It's an interesting hypothesis, like Bigfoot, but who cares? The only thing that actually counts is the inner work. And if you're doing it, you're doing it.
So,
and if you're not doing it, and you don't measure yourself either, as soon as you're looking for results, that's already a way of not getting them. It's a very delicate and yet profound subject. And if you go to a good Zen master, this stuff is still around. There are masters. My own focus, as you probably know, or maybe you don't, is the Gurdjieff work. Because when I came across Gurdjieff, an extraordinary character, he was the first person I'd ever encountered posthumously. He died in 1949, and I found out about his work in the 1960s, who was as contemptuous of Western civilization as I was. The difference was that he knew how to live in it, and I didn't. And at a certain point, I figured out, particularly what you're talking about before, that My Life in the Trenches, good subtitle for something.
I still don't understand what you mean about achieving immortality. So if you're not talking about physical immortality, you're not talking about someone living 1,000 years and plus.
No, absolutely not.
What are you talking about? You're talking about the ideas that they promote, transcending and moving on?
I'm talking about a level of consciousness that transcends death, that the body dies, and that understanding is where you are. I mean, the drugs do that. You have these moments that with the body, you come back because you get out of the trip. Let's say it's an eternal trip, and the ancients talk about that all the time, even in their mythology, which is always taken as fanciful. Let's say in the pyramid texts, the script reads that when the pharaoh dies, and the pharaoh being, let's say, the embodiment of the realized and enlightened soul, when the pharaoh dies, his ba unites with his ka, his spirit unites with his essence, becomes a star, and travels with Ra across the sky in his boat of millions of years. And in fact, I've often wondered if the Egyptians actually knew what they were talking about, and the stars themselves are the realizations of enlightened souls. It's as good as any other explanation that they're simply balls of gas. How did that get there? That automatically, at some point, accidentally coalesce into galaxies and nebula and universes, and the whole thing goes on meaninglessly.
Well, I don't think anybody thinks it's meaningless, but it is kind of fascinating that stars themselves are the only reason why people are alive.
That's right.
Like we are made of stardust, which is just
we are indeed
incredible to think that the seeds of human life and all carbon life, in fact, come from a star exploding. Like, wow. Yeah. Like everything that you see, like the sun is a seed for future life.
That's right.
That's bananas.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that you've answered your own question, as it were. That understanding, and I wouldn't even call it a philosophy. It's an understanding by people who understand more than we do, certainly more than I do.
But if you say that's our goal to achieve immortality, that sounds like we're going to get it anyway, no matter what.
Well, no, actually, with the NDEs, no. What happens? No? Not really. No, they've had their experience. They've had their X number of minutes of grace, and come back. Transformed, and realize that they have to live their lives differently. They don't even talk about the future or anything like that. I mean, this is obviously a very big thing that not many people evidently achieve. But the effort, like everything else, the effort is the effort, and it's on the scorecard. It's like it's not so different from everybody who picks up a violin isn't going to end up in Carnegie Hall, and everyone who picks up a baseball bat isn't going to play center field for the Mets or any other team. But it's the effort that counts, and it's a certain kind of directed and intelligent effort that is painful in its own way, but carries its own reward, and it manifests in a kind of presence, and just in our daily lives, even with people who are not consciously doing it, but they're doing it, they have a different level of presence, and you notice it when you meet them.
Now, what is it that you think these ancient Egyptians, when you talk about the earliest Egyptians that you believe had achieved this incredible state of mind or consciousness, what is it that you think that they did to achieve that? Like, why were they so advanced? Why were they so beyond what we think of when we think of even the possibility of a human being living 34,000+ years ago? Like, how did they achieve that?
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. All we can see is the manifestation of what they did when you really understand Egypt, even to the extent that I do. You regard it as miraculous. You don't see how beings ostensibly like ourselves should even imagine such things, much less be able to do it. And this is what I'll pitch my trip.
Okay.
I often start a lecture off by saying that Egypt is like sex. That gets everybody's attention. Why is it like sex? Because you can read books about it, and that's informational of sorts. You can look at pictures, that's a different kind or a different level of information. But until you've experienced it, you do not and cannot understand it. And Egypt is like that. That Magical Egypt series is as close as anyone has ever come to communicating the wonder and the magic that is Egypt as anyone has ever. It's way head and shoulders above what anybody else has done. And that's my genius partner Chance is doing in its entirety. It's, simplest ideas, and I play a big role in it, but it's really Chance's baby. And but at the visit to Egypt, at the end of a couple of weeks there, I can talk from now till doomsday, which I'm about in the process of doing, and nothing that I say can come even remotely close to what it's like to be 2 weeks in Egypt, day after day after day after day, in the presence of sacred art of this quality. And there's nowhere else on the left. I mean, I'm sure that China and India and all of these places had not pyramids and not that kind of structure. The nature of Egypt, it's strange. It's a kind of freak of nature, as it were. All desert except this little strip of Nile. And then the delta that until recently was impenetrable swamp. So it's practically unattackable. And the Nile floods, and the food jumps out of the ground, and with a series of genuinely enlightened rulers, or at least pretty close to enlightened rulers, ruling them, that all lasts for 3,500 years. And how did they live? You see everything that they did. In fact, until quite recently, there were no such things as jobs. There were trades and crafts and skills and arts. And everybody, I mean, yes, in Europe, the combination of a repressive church and an oppressive nobility kept everybody, immersed in serfdom in one way or another. But what people actually did with their lives was, in some sense or another, transformational. All of it. It takes a lot of smarts to be a good peasant. All of these things that people used to do as a matter of course. And in Egypt, you see it. You see it carved into the walls, and everyone thinks these are the scenes of daily life. Well, they are scenes of daily life, but they're decodable as transformational activities. So anything that you do, and boy, you're doing martial arts, this is a highly developed skill. You are somebody that you wouldn't be if you didn't have that skill. If you were doing a podcast and what you did for a living was flipping burgers at McDonald's, you wouldn't be Joe Rogan. You've been doing your homework without maybe even thinking that it was homework. Because anything that you're involved in that you go at with a quest for perfection of whatever it is has this transformational value. And when you recognize, when you know it, let's say when you know it intellectually, when you can articulate it, it implements the activity itself. So it's possible even to do that. You could be an enlightened burger flipper, and the Sufis are very good at. The Sufi is in life, but not is in life, but not of it. In other words, you can practice waking up, as it were, in the midst of the most mundane thing. You could be an enlightened garbage collector, as long as you knew what you were doing. It's a totally different thing. I would imagine. I'm not a garbage collector. It's a totally different thing to collect the garbage consciously than it is to just do it resentfully, because that's the only job that you can get. Although,
right.
So when we're talking, it's not as though this is anything actually new. It's the oldest idea that ever was, and it's something that people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. That said, going into the whole thing of precession and the ages, particularly as expressed Plato, they have the Golden Age and the Silver Age, and a Bronze Age and an Iron Age. The Hindus do it in rather more sophisticated fashion. I forget exactly the name, they're on the tip of my tongue, of those ages. But if they are, let's say, analogous to our seasons, particularly if you live where I do and not in California where it's all one season. But the seasons, it's
The
very
yugas,
easy.
is that it? The yugas?
The yugas, that's
Yeah.
right. If they're compared to the seasons, it's a very different thing to grow roses in June than it is in January. It's the same effort when you're talking about people, about waking up and all of the rest of it. This is a dark age. I mean, this is the Kali Yuga as far as I'm concerned. To do anything of a spiritual nature now with all of these forces lined up against you, not consciously, of course, but unconsciously, it's an incredibly difficult thing to actually practice a genuine spiritual doctrine. First of all, you have to get interested in it, and that's only a small chunk of us, and then you have to try to do it.
And you have to have the time, you have to have the focus.
Or make the time and
Don't
the
be
focus,
distracted.
and that's right, the focus and the will and all the rest of the things. And so growing roses in January takes a lot more effort than to get to the same rose than it takes in June when they're jumping out of the ground. So my guess is, and it's only a guess, it's speculation, that in these higher levels of these higher periods of gold and silver, bronze, and so on, it's just much easier. It is much easier for people to recognize what's demanded of them and to do it than it is in the middle of a from a spiritual point of view, spiritual but brightly lit, unilluminated but brightly lit dark age.
Well,
which is where we are.
If you look at the influence that Egypt had clearly on Greece and clearly on a lot of other civilizations where people literally came to Egypt to learn, if Egypt wasn't there, what would civilization be like? I mean, it's such a unique place in that there's really nowhere that you can compare that has the level of sophistication as far as the structures in the ancient world. There's not even, I mean, it's almost like what they created was undeniable. Like I think Giza, the Great Pyramid of Giza has 2,300,000 stones that weigh between 2 and 80 tons.
Yeah.
Like what? Like how? That's insane.
It is.
Like there's the level of sophistication in creating something like that. I mean, I've only seen it in photographs, but one of the greatest photographs I've ever seen is from someone with a GoPro standing on the top of it. So you get this kind of a sense of how immense it really truly is.
Yeah.
And you just think about how incredible that must have been especially when it's covered with smooth limestone before they cut it all off.
Right.
I mean, what you're seeing is it's an undeniable mastery of physical things to the point where it makes your head spin because people say we can do that today. Well, okay, maybe we kind of understand that it's been done and that we can do pretty immense things. We have some pretty incredible tractors and machines and everything like that, but they didn't have those.
No,
as far as we know.
They didn't have those. They might have had something else.
What do you think they had?
I don't know. I mean,
do you have like some hypothesis, some theories in your head about the construction methods?
A bit. That actually from Tibet. There's actually a funny little book. I've done some lectures out at what is it called? In Joshua Tree. You know about that?
Mm-hmm.
About it's a contact in the desert. They're mostly interested in the UFO phenomenon and stuff like that. But the place itself, Joshua Retreat Center, is founded by a very interesting guy who's sort of the Tibetan Krishnamurti. In other words, it's an interesting little book he wrote, terribly written, but his studies in Tibet. And at the end of this little book, he's studying with the lamas. He describes certain of the things he has seen them do, and I see no particular reason to dismiss what he says. He's talking from experience, and it has the ring of veracity to it. He talks about going into an underground chamber that has no lights or electricity or anything like that. That's all lit up. And when you go to Egypt, you have these deep, deep shaft tombs that go down and around and all like this. And people say, well, how did they light the thing up? Can't have had torches. It would have used up all of the oxygen, and it would have smoked up the ceilings and all the rest of it. Some people say, well, mirrors. No, mirrors will do, and you need silvered mirrors to go around corners. There are the gypsy caves in Seville that have 4 or 5 rooms and that are lit with mirrors from on top. But no, somehow, and I used to joke and say, well, you know, they had an inner light. Joking, but maybe that's what it was. That they produce this, and he talks about other lamas he's witnessed doing incredible feats of that you couldn't do, you know, that you just couldn't do in your ordinary state. Probably you, as a martial artist, have had moments or witnessed people who can do things that are, for anybody else, impossible.
Yeah, but they don't light up tunnels.
No, they don't light up tunnels, but they can do physical things that are
they're extraordinary.
They're almost miraculous. That nobody else could do them.
Yeah, but it's a really important point what you're saying about the construction methods that they used, where they did have these long tunnels and these passages and these places, but somehow or another they managed to navigate these things without leaving any marks or soot from torches, which are everywhere else where people used candles, or anywhere else, like, you know, in the Sistine Chapel, like the entire ceiling is covered with soot. You know, they had to clean it, to prepare it so people could see it again. But that's really fascinating to think that they had some other method of illumination that we just haven't discovered yet. We don't know what they did or how they did it.
That's one thing, but you look at a jillion other things. Particularly, this is again one of the reasons why the Sphinx theory is so contentious to these, so dangerous to these guys, because the Sphinx, carving the Sphinx is one thing, but okay, limestones are relatively resilient stones, or relatively soft stone. Enough guys with chisels, even if they're copper chisels, could do that given enough time and enough genius. But the temples either side of it are built of stones half the size of this room, slotted into place like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. This is unbelievable.
And again, what you just said is really important. Copper tools.
That's what they think. Copper tempered with arsenic. I mean, but those same copper tools are supposedly used for carving the granite. If you go to Egypt, actually, you should get a huge audience. Get a Joe Rogan trip together and come on to Egypt.
I'm not going with people listening to this podcast.
Well, have a test.
Too many freaks.
Well,
90% of them would be great. That 10%.
Well, keep out the 10%. It's just prepare a...
I have to have a filter. Have a conversation with them.
Prepare a filter.
Get them in a room.
Prepare a filter. And...
How many people would you take at a time?
I have a max of 24.
Interesting.
Because more than that is unmanageable.
Right.
And when you see it, I mean, one thing after the other.
And it's totally safe to go to Egypt right now?
Well, it's as safe as Los Angeles. I mean, or anywhere else here in Dumfuckistan. It's, you know, this is
Dumfuckistan.
for Americans to, of all people, to be afraid of going somewhere.
We're worried about Islamic terrorism more than anything, because
it's here.
Yes,
it's already here, and Islamic terrorism is itself a tiny little bit of the terrorism that goes on a daily basis. You open the internet, and there's some nutcase kid somewhere or another shooting down a mall. I mean, the known terrorists have accounted for it. It's not even a statistic. It's an X number of people that they've gone after. But here in this crazy, violent country, you're never safe anywhere. Schools aren't safe. Malls aren't safe. What's safe?
Right. So Cairo has some nice hotels too, right?
Oh, great hotels. Yeah, we stay at a place actually right across a stone's throw from the pyramids itself.
So you can look at the pyramid out your window.
Yeah, you can.
Wow.
That's right. You can do that.
When I look at the Great Pyramid, or I look at the structures that I've seen online or in your videos or things along those lines, what's shocking to me is how, and this is going to be a weird thing to say, how Egyptian it looks, and how Egypt stands alone in this very distinctive way. And that the construction methods, the intricacy of the building, and these pyramids. I mean, people talk about the Mayan pyramids, and I've been to Chichen Itza, and it's an amazing place, and it's really beautiful and crazy to look at, but it pales in comparison to the structures of Egypt.
Yeah, everything pales in
So
comparison
what
with
happened?
it.
How did that happen?
Well, as I said, because it was in a kind of a blessed one. It had a philosophy. It had a spiritual philosophy underpinning it that united the people in their entirety. Doesn't mean that there weren't criminals and murderers and stuff like that, but basically the people were united in their faith, united in their belief. Herodotus, when Egypt was 6th century BC, Herodotus, and Egypt is already in steep decline, says the Egyptians are the happiest, healthiest, and most religious of people. And it wasn't the Egyptian Chamber of Commerce that was telling him to say that. He was a patriotic Greek. But it was like that, and it was a combination of the philosophy wedded to in a society that was protected on all four sides and almost impregnable. It was conquered a couple of times over the course of 3,000 years for a relatively brief period of time. And the food jumped out of the ground. The Nile flooded and took practically no work. And that made a quite substantial population. It gave them months of free time every year.
So how did it all go wrong?
Now we're talking about the Kali Yugas. Whatever period Egypt is assigned to is on a downhill slope. It just plain was on a downhill slope, and you can watch it transform in front of your eyes. It disintegrates as a coherent religion, rises in another form that we call Christianity, actually, and you can see it happening in front of your nose with Coptic Christianity arising. All the rest of the stuff gets completely decadent under the Romans. I mean, Rome, what's his name? Edward Gibbon, in Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, talks about the grandeur, the glory of Greece, which is absolute nonsense, or totally near total nonsense, and the grandeur of Rome. Yeah, they were building colosseums in order to torture, in order to let gladiators kill each other, and they built good roads. But Rome was a three-ring bureaucracy, actually, and that's the beginning of the end. In Europe, anyway, it's very traceable. The Asian countries less so, but they too have high civilizations that decline. And in Europe, you see kind of a turnaround in the Renaissance, very impossible to actually date. And then you have it leading in a sort of, very one-sided development in which technology advances by leaps and bounds, and everything else is arguably a lot worse than it was a couple of hundred years ago. From every spiritual, psychological point of view, we're a lot worse off than, let's say, the colonial Americans.
Do you really think so?
Oh, yeah.
But the depictions of the colonial Americans by the ancient people, when you who was it that described the atrocities that Columbus and his crew had done? What preacher, that priest?
Oh, yeah, no, loads of them, sure.
Yeah. They had done horrific things.
Oh, those are the conquerors, yeah.
Right.
I'm not talking about the settlers
also
who
the
murdered all the
Aztecs,
Indians.
Right?
Oh, and the
Cortez,
Aztecs. This
and
is already
all that stuff. Montezuma was a piece of shit. Slaughter of 80,000 slaves after they built Teotihuacan. How do you say that?
Teotihuacan.
Teotihuacan.
This I don't know about, and I don't know, again.
But they seem like bad people, too. Right?
Oh, there's loads of bad people around.
They just didn't have the internet.
No, but I'm talking about they certainly didn't have the internet and lots of other goodies they didn't have. No, but there was a certain, let's say, about the populace in general in America, a certain gravitas about them. There's a certain presence that is of our great-great-grandfathers. Well, not mine, because they were in Hungary at that time, my great-great. But there's a certain sort of like Emerson self-reliance. I mean, this is a piece of it. Meanwhile, of course, they're whopping all the slaves in the South, and they're murdering all the Indians, and the billionaires, as is their fashion, are beating up on their Irish immigrant workers, because why have slaves when they can mistreat their workers and build all of their railroads across the country. But nevertheless, there's a sense of, as I say, gravitas is almost the only word I can think of, because it's not as though it's intellectually advanced or anything like that. But there's a certain seeming solidity to 19th century America than there is now in this crazy chaos that
Don't you think that there's always this tendency in human beings that long for nostalgia? They look back to the past, to a moment when things made sense. It seems to me that there's always that. And even when people are full of shit about it, like they look back on the high school days, man, those are the good old days. Like, what are you talking about? You had pimples, you were out of your fucking mind, insecure, you're terrified of the future. That wasn't the good old days.
This is true. Yeah, Trump, make America great again. Yeah, bring back slavery. Find some more. No, we run out of Indians, murder the Muslims.
Yeah, let's go to the Arab nations, or let's go to the Amazon.
Yeah, let's import them and murder them.
Yeah,
and let's bring back all of that stuff. No, it was never great. But as I said, there is a kind of...
Maybe I'm more optimistic. I think there's an awakening going on right now with human beings that's unprecedented. And I think it's because of the internet. I think because of the fact that we're combining our thoughts in some sort of a strange way and sharing ideas and information in a way that no one's ever been able to do before. I don't think people have ever been this aware of how crazy things are. But at the same time, look at the lunacy of last night's presidential debate, and you realize, like, well, I guess we really haven't. I mean, we might be aware of things, but actual progress is not really being made.
We have the ability to be aware of things,
yes,
but we are not, at least in sufficient numbers,
doing anything about it.
We are not doing anything about it,
Yeah.
and that's the crux of the matter. It's one thing. This is why intellectual, spiritual. Intellectual mysticism is a total waste of time. It's like intellectual violin playing. No, you got to play the violin.
Yeah.
Or it's not music.
Right. So thinking about Egypt is not good enough. You got to go.
The ability, the ability to get information is now absolutely unparalleled. Yeah, there's as far as we know, there's never been anything remotely like this. At the same time, there's never been that much static. So, as we were talking about earlier, the crystal sniffers and the unicorns and the ancient aliens. This is all a vast amount of static. So you have to be able to find your way you have to find your way through the static to the music.
How much does Ancient Aliens frustrate you?
Not much, because I watched a couple of programs.
But if you did, are you throwing things at the TV and screaming?
No, I don't. I have low expectations. So it's TV. It's supposed to. It's entertainment, and the people who are putting it together, don't know what they're doing, except they see that it works and they want to make money.
Is it possible that the aliens made the pyramids? When they have all these experts, everything it is it possible that extraterrestrials, I guess it's possible.
That's right. Well, it is possible. And Giorgio, of course, pushed into a corner, says, yeah, all of this and that and so on. Still, it's aliens.
Giorgio Tsoukalos? Yeah. He's beautiful. I love that guy.
He's a funny guy.
He's a funny guy. When you think of ancient Egypt and you think of the public's understanding and awareness of it, what do you think the average person is missing?
All of it.
All of it.
Basically. Yeah. So
you think it's like right before our face, in front of our eyes, and most people just have no idea the majesty and how intensely unique it is?
No, look, our Mystery of the Sphinx, which was at that time one of the most watched TV documentaries of all time, and it really had a massive audience, and people who saw it remember it. I mean, even to this day.
Got me.
You saw it? Oh, you did? Okay.
I have a VHS cassette tape of it, sir.
Oh, really? Wait, I brought it. Wait, did I bring it? I forget if I brought you.
I think you can get it online now. I think it might be on YouTube.
It's on DVD. I was going to bring you a DVD of it,
beautiful.
actually, but I maybe forgot.
I've almost memorized it.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, I've seen it quite a few times.
That had a certain impact.
For sure.
But even if 30 million people saw it, 300 million didn't.
Right, and then going there is really what's up.
And well, that's the big crunch, and only X number of people can go there.
I went to the Vatican last summer, this past summer, my first time ever in Italy, and I had seen it on television before. Obviously, I'd seen videos and stuff. I've seen photos. Boy, when you're there and you're like in what is it, St. Peter's Basilica?
Yeah,
when you St. Paul's?
St.
Paul's?
No,
Paul's.
St. Paul's. Wait,
one of those guys.
Now
One of those old dead dudes.
Now you mistook it. It's St. Peter's.
Is it?
Yeah, St.
Okay.
Peter's with the dome where the Pope
Yes.
always comes out.
And you look at it and you go, what? When you're inside of it and you realize the insane magnitude of the construction, the fact that it took hundreds of years to complete, and they did it all without saws, without power tools, rather. They did it all without any modern equipment, and it's unbelievably beautiful.
Yeah.
Incredible work of art, and it pales in comparison to what they did in Egypt,
Yes, it does.
which is like, I think I gotta go because it's one of those. Well, they also have an obelisk. That's a 4,000-year-old obelisk
Yeah,
that's
they
in the
stole it
middle
from
of
Egypt, of course.
Yeah, they stole it
took
from Egypt. Yeah,
Yes.
and you just look at that, and when you're there physically and you look at it in person, you just go, "How the fuck did they make this?"
So wait a minute now. Wait, this is
Yeah.
The cathedral the basilica is very interesting and all that.
But
how did they move? How did they get this? Actually, it's an interesting book by my now deceased friend Peter Tompkins on the magic of the obelisks, where he's talking about ripping them out of context and bringing them to Rome and New York and England. And it was interesting because they were brought over in the 19th century, and it's already, technology is pretty advanced. I mean, you have huge cranes and all the rest of it, and it strained the Victorian technology to the utmost to get these things over. And then you realize that the Egyptians did it with none of those tools
yeah,
at all. They somehow got them ripped out of the bedrock, brought down the river, offloaded from the rafts or boats or whatever, which is a big job, transported across the ground, that's doable, erected in place precisely to the millimeter on the base. That's a big mystery.
did they have levels?
What?
Did they have levels like bubble levels?
Not bubble levels, but they had other kinds. They did it with water somehow or another. That's I think, reasonably well established, but I forget exactly how it was on how they leveled, for example, the base of the pyramid to a millimeter or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, everything that you look at in Egypt when you go there, the deeper you look, the more mysterious it becomes, and you marvel at how the devil did that.
Well, the King's Chamber is one of the most bizarre ones, right?
Yeah.
Isn't
Well,
it?
it's more bizarre than other things. I mean, it's
But just the enormity of the stones, the way they're set up, that it's such a complex system. The way they've set them in place is so
I
incredible.
think you're talking about the ones the so-called relieving chambers, which are really resonating chambers.
Resonating
above them.
chambers.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, they don't relieve anything architecturally, completely unnecessary to relieve the stresses from above. Directly below the King's Chamber is the so-called Queen's Chamber, which doesn't have that at all. Has a simple gabled roof, and that protects it from anything that it needs. The other chambers, when you're in the King's Chamber, it's an echo chamber. You can't. It's really a miraculous place, and of course everything is precision cut and all of that, but it doesn't look that fantastic. It's the levels above that are the most amazing things, because these are the 70-ton blocks of stone. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
How they got those into place, no one knows, but they're responsible for the resonance of that particular chamber, and it's my belief that resonance plays. Even not necessarily resonance for the human voice, but when you're in there, I forget the acoustic term, feedback or whatever, that you can't, for example, if we're in the King's Chamber and we rent the pyramid for a couple of hours and for a meditation section on my trips, and when you're in there, you can't have a conversation the way we're having it now. You have to talk like this, otherwise the reverberation is such that it scrambles your voice.
Whoa.
This can only be deliberate, and you can hear from the King's Chamber, if you do a chant in the King's Chamber, if you go all the way down the ground gallery, and then there's a place below where you have to make a turn, and then there's a descending passage that goes as deep below the ground as the pyramid, as the King's Chamber is above the ground. It's about 12-story shaft that you go down.
Below the ground, 12 stories.
And 12 stories down below, and then 12 stories built
Wow,
up
look
above.
at that.
And right, very good. And and if you set up a chant in the King's Chamber, you can hear it down in the pit below.
12 stories below.
Yeah, but you shouldn't be able to hear it at all because the sound has to go down and then turn around and then go down the other shaft. By the way, I should say, because people are always asking me now, it's a function of age, how long are you going to keep doing these trips?
Yeah.
And I say, well, unless and until I can't get up and down the King's Chamber, up to the King's Chamber, I'll be doing trips unless some media thing takes over. But as they say in Texas, if you can do it, it ain't bragging. And that's a good line. So I was in Egypt recently on a research recce trip, but that may lead to something and that may not. We'll see.
Recce trip?
A reconnaissance.
Oh.
The film lingo for reconnaissance.
I thought it was like a meditation.
No,
like Reiki.
No, not Reiki. Not Reiki. No. And actually, so normally I would go with the group up to the King's Chamber, but I don't bother to go. It gets opened up and you go down into the pit. So I said, it's on my 84th birthday. I happened to be in Egypt, so I said, okay, I'll test it. So I went up to the King's Chamber and down the shaft. So that's 12 stories up and 12 stories down. And I went down to the pit. It was 12 stories down and 12 stories up. And I figured that was pretty good for 84. So
that's pretty good.
So I'll be doing the trips for a while.
Nice. Well, that's good. Because, I don't think anybody's capable of doing the same kind of experience that you would provide. Like, your knowledge of Egypt is pretty rare in this day and age.
Well, I was hoping when I had this idea to do my own trips, I thought, finally I'll make a living out of this stuff. But what happened was that no sooner had my guidebook come out. You probably don't have a copy of that. And it's out of print now, but I have copies. Back in 85, the first of the terrorist things happened, and these guys hijacked the cruise ship off Alexandria and pushed this poor old guy in a wheelchair over the side of the cruise ship, and he drowned. And my book had just come out, and instantly the tourist trade was killed. Talking about people being afraid. For a whole year it took for it to develop. And it did develop again, but the book had disappeared from the shelves by that time. Anyway, it's still available, of course. But, wait, I lost my thread. With the trips, what did you say? With Egypt.
Someone doing them,
someone doing it. My plan was I wanted to train a number of people up who's familiar, steeped in symbolist Egypt, to spread the word, as it were. And while I was at it, get a commission from the trips to provide some useful wolf repellent.
So you can have some nice passive income.
Right, but it never happened because one thing led to another, and it was hard enough getting my own trips filled up. But yeah, unfortunately, as it now stands, I'm the only one. Only a handful of people know symbolist Egypt well enough to communicate it. As it just so happens, I'm the only one who does trips. So
that's so
I
crazy.
really am the only wheel in town in that regard.
Well, you brought us a bunch of slides. So why
Right.
don't you tell me what do you want to show us, and what did you bring here?
Well, that's my whole long lecture. You want to go to the geology of the Sphinx, the water weathering, and then the other slides related to that, the gigantic blocks, paving blocks, particularly around the second pyramid, and mostly around the second pyramid, and then, all of that stuff relates to the scientific, the geological evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Then I wanted to get into, I didn't want to touch the symbolist, the quest for immortality, because that's a whole big subsequent thing. I did want to get into, and we didn't even talk about it. The map of Dumfuckistan, and what I call and I've got a great graphic for it actually. Everybody certainly, and everybody, probably most of your audience will know about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, right?
Mm-hmm.
From Revelation, who are actually an interesting study in its own right. The four horsemen are war, famine, pestilence, and death. And what's interesting about the Four Horsemen is that only war is really under human control, at least in theory. You know, famine, pestilence, plague, as it were, and death comes to us all. It's a peculiar choice, actually, for the Four Horsemen. But I invented the 5 cowboys of Apocalypse 2.0, and they are capitalism, patriotism, democracy, technology, and entertainment.
All the stuff I love.
Yeah, well,
That's the end?
well, no, it's just another way of looking at things, actually.
It's really human folly, all of it, right?
Well, yeah.
Call it democracy, call it capitalism, call it technology. It's none of those things. It's human folly. It's the error in human use.
Well,
right?
yeah. Well, okay. Capitalism is really based upon the philosophy: everything for me, nothing for you. You see, everybody's fighting for market share. Why can't you let a guy stay alive?
It's competition. But if it wasn't for that competition, we wouldn't be here. We
You're
wouldn't
not
have
so sure of
planes
that.
that shoot across the sky. We wouldn't have laptops that work so well.
We
wouldn't
might.
have internet that's so fast. I don't know. We might, but we
yeah.
might not. It's
And-
very possible that we wouldn't.
And there's a downside to all of those things.
Yeah,
as
but
a
there's an
matter of
upside,
fact.
too.
There is an upside.
I'm a glass
That's
half
the-
full kind of guy, John Anthony West.
That's the technology side of it. I haven't
Yes.
got to that yet.
Okay.
Capitalism is based upon everything for me, nothing for you. Patriotism is based upon everything for us, nothing for them. The bumper sticker says, God bless America. The hidden sticky side says, and fuck everyone else.
Right.
That's patriotism. Democracy is that the idea is that the dishwashers elect the chef and tell him what to do. I don't know about you. I don't eat in a restaurant where the dishwashers elect the chef and tell him what to do. It's flawed. It's hopelessly flawed to begin with, which Plato recognized perfectly. Churchill said democracy looks like the worst of all possible political systems until you look at all the others. At the same time, this is fun, and it's not necessarily untrue. At the same time, he also said, contradicting himself, the best argument against democracy is 10 minutes of conversation with an average voter. I don't know about you. I don't want my leaders elected numerically by the average voter.
Right.
Actually, if they had a test for if there were, which is next to impossible to even conceive, if voting were a privilege. I mean, when the country started off, it was a privilege, but you had to be a white male who owned property, which is not as elitist as it actually looks now, because in those days, they were the only ones who were substantial enough and probably had some sort of an education. It doesn't mean necessarily that they understand the principles. And they were you might say the solid citizens who at least could read. I mean, nobody else could read except people with an education of some sort. So that was the rule, and it wasn't a terribly good rule, but it might have been in its own way. Anyway, that's as a principle that it shouldn't be a privilege to vote, just as like anybody could produce. Why shouldn't anybody be able to do brain surgery, or design a bridge? I'm as good as the next guy. I've never designed a bridge. I don't have any training, but it's a democracy. Why can't I do that? Or play center field for the Mets? Just
And
because
that's what the president is, really, essentially. Anybody, you just have to say, I want to do it, step up, this is my plan, and get people to vote for you.
Well, it's a catastrophe. Anyway, put it this way. In its current form, and in fact as far back as you could go in America, it's been a disaster democracy. Technology is certainly a mixed bag. Two big problems with technology. The main one, and we touched upon this earlier, is that technology deprives the normal human being of making a living out of his own out of his own creativity.
It deprives them? Technology does? How so?
The only people who are creative in technology are the people who are creating the technology. Everybody else serves the technology. They work in the offices that serve the technology. They're basically slaves to the technology.
But what about the people that use the technology to separate themselves from slave jobs? Like there's a lot of people that have started their own businesses online
Yeah.
because they could use technology now. So crafts, people who create things.
That's the upside, but it's a relatively small part compared to the number of people. They talk about all these good jobs going out to China. Those are shitty jobs. Nobody in their right mind would want to work in a factory. Have you ever worked in a factory?
No.
Or been in a factory, really?
Yes, I've been in factories.
Because I went to schools as seldom as I possibly could in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which is where the Bethlehem Steel Center was, and we used to go there on field trips. Holy mackerel, this was like working in Dante's Inferno, these blackened figures jumping up and down in the blinding heat of the Bessemer converters and the other kinds of jobs of robots stuffing things into boxes or flipping burgers. The vast majority of people, they get they have their television sets and their internet and stuff like that. But the vast majority of people do not make their living out of their own creativity. And before, however terrible things may have been in medieval times, people did creative transformational things. So that's the downside of technology. And the other bad side of technology, you talked about the good side. The bad side is that it's not immoral necessarily, but it's amoral. So as long as they can do it, they do it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, hydrogen bomb, why not? We don't invent it, somebody else will do it. Nerve gas, well, that's a very good way of getting away with, around stuff. Striped toothpaste, well, it's a waste of time and effort and stuff like that, but maybe we can sell more striped toothpaste than unstriped toothpaste. And the rest of it is, in other words, a percentage of it, the medicine is very good until it gets into the hands of big pharma, and then make sure that that people are ripped off for, to get at the medicine that they need, and the medicine that they have available is not usually a cure. It's a way of keeping people alive and buying more medicine. Anything that's actually a cure that comes from alternative sources is fought to the death by the big pharmaceutical companies. So technology is certainly a mixed bag. And entertainment, depending on how you define it, is what you do to kill time before it kills you. For the most part, it's an absolute waste of time. It takes your mind off the boringness of your own life. Art is different. Art is not entertainment. There's a broad line in between that, at least in theory, could or should be filled by comedy, which is not exactly entertainment, but it's not exactly sacred science either. But it plays, at least theoretically, it can play a kind of a transformational role. You can, real high-level comedy is enlightening. It points out, and comedy is based upon, you can't laugh. Comedy is based upon what's wrong. You can't laugh at what's right. You can't make fun of good sex or good food. You can make fun of attitudes toward good sex or good food. But you can't laugh at what's right. Not easily. But you can laugh, but you can and do laugh at what's wrong. And so, let's say at some inner level, by laughing at what's wrong, inadvertently, it's a recognition. We have within us, let's say, we have a moral compass, or compass is the wrong word. We have a moral thermometer or something of the sort that recognizes, by recognizing what's wrong, we're giving assent to what's right. It is to cultural, of course, what's funny to an Eskimo is not necessarily funny to an African. What's funny to an African is not necessarily funny to a Chinese. But comedy has this potential to play, at least in my view, a transformational role. But anyway, mostly it doesn't. And entertainment, at the American level, turn on your television set. Is that entertainment? It's certainly not art. It's a deadening. It's an anodyne. It's sort of, most of it is a kind of what's it that you take to go to
sedative.
Sleep? It's basically a kind of sedative, or the opposite, or it's like a Benny. It's a
Stimulant?
It's a stimulant,
Right.
actually, with with the Terminator and all of
Right.
these horrible, vicious things that they do. So that's yeah.
Let's get to the slides.
Right.
Because we're already 2 hours in here.
Oh yeah.
Let's take a look at some of the slides of where do you want to start?
Let's start with the geology. Start
Okay.
right at the beginning, and I'll just whip you past. Okay.
Now, why are they? This is a really confusing thing to me. Why do they continue to rebuild that thing? Because when they're rebuilding it, they're rebuilding the feet and the paws of the Sphinx, and I understand there's considerable erosion that they have to mitigate, but it's not the Sphinx anymore. I mean,
Well, it's bringing the Sphinx back to supposedly what it was originally. The problem is an engineering problem. They don't know themselves, and at least a few of them acknowledge it. Schock thinks this, and I mean, he's not in charge of doing the repairs, that it may be doing more damage because it's still weathering on the inside, and by covering it over with these usually very badly done stuff, that they're actually doing more damage than that. Well, the Department of Antiquities
is this Zawi?
He's no longer
Is he in the
charge.
pokey? Did they lock him up?
No.
I know he was in trouble for a
They've never
while,
been
right?
able. He was in trouble, but they couldn't pin it on him.
Oh, the slippery
And they would
bastard.
have if they could. No, listen, Zahi, on a personal level, that's another long story, and we've already gone on for 2 hours. But on a personal level, I can get on with Zahi, and then he's now back in, not formally in a position of power. He's not head of the department. And he's got his problems.
Did you see the debate that he had with Graham Hancock?
Oh God,
walked out.
He was a
right
disaster.
away.
Yeah, he was a disaster, and all of his friends even. I mean, the guy who runs my trip, Mohammed Nazmi, I called a surgeon because he really knows how to operate. He's a wonderful guy, and he's a good personal friend of Zahi's. And he said, Zahi, this is a disaster, but he lived through it, and he's back on the scene, as it were. Anyway,
so we're looking at the Sphinx enclosure here, and this massive structure with all this erosion around it.
right, all this erosion to it, and then
People
the
see this
side-
on YouTube.
Yeah, when you'll see as we go through a few slides, you get a few slides, you'll see the sense of that erosion. This is just a wonderful picture of it taken by a good friend of mine. Keep going.
Have they thought about doing?
This is why the Sphinx could not have been weathered by sand.
What we're looking at
Because
right now, for the
this-
people that are just listening,
Right.
is it buried in sand, which it has been many times when Napoleon found it. It was buried in sand, correct?
Right, completely buried in sand, and probably for a few thousand years. This is photograph taken about 2000, when it had already been excavated and filled up with sand again, which happens pretty quickly. So basically you can say, give or take a few hundred years, that since its supposed construction around 2500 BC, it's been buried in sand about 3,000 of those 4,500 years.
That's
So that's
insane.
the proof. Yeah, there's the evidence. And still the geologists go on ranting about sand. When you were talking about this friend of yours who's going through the trees, say, okay, how did it weather by sand?
Wind and sand, right? How did it
the wind
get
can't
exposed?
the wind can't affect it that
Well,
way.
wasn't that the original text of who do they attribute to the construction of the pyramid? Tutmosis?
No. Pharaoh Khafra.
Khafra.
The successor of Khufu, who supposedly built the Great Pyramid, which is not true in its entirety. The pyramids, this is another complex argument, which,
Right.
as you see, everything's complex. They're almost certainly built in stages, and the earliest stages probably date from whenever the Sphinx was originally built.
And the argument for Khafra building it wasn't a text that said that he had a dream that if he uncovered the Sphinx, that he would become pharaoh.
No, that's Tutmosis
That's
the Fourth.
Tutmosis, okay.
1,000 years later, they attribute it to Khafra because the causeway that leads from the Sphinx, if you go behind it, you see the beginning? Not really. You see just the back of the Sphinx. The causeway leads up right to the middle of the pyramid, of the Khafra pyramid, which he almost certainly did build, or anyway superimposed upon something that was there before, because you can prove that. Okay, keep going.
Did they used to think it was Tutmosis?
No. They always thought it was Khafra because, again.
What is this right here? That's not the Rosetta Stone, is it?
No. That's the stela of Tutmosis that talks about how in a dream it's covered with sand.
Oh, that's it right there. Then.
That's in 1450 BC.
So that means
evidence,
in 1450 BC it was covered
in sand. Exactly. And with a certain number of other evidences of that sort, you can put together the timeline that tells you.
I swear I've read online someone attributing Tutmosis to the creation of it, but there's a lot of erroneous.
There's a lot of junk on it.
Now, the face of the Sphinx, this is a really controversial thing, right? Because the face of the Sphinx is clearly newer than the body. It's less eroded, and it's also a very African-looking face. Do they think that, which obviously it's the continent Africa, but do they think the Nubians had conquered Egypt at one point in time, right? And wasn't the speculation that one of the Nubian pharaohs had created this?
Yeah, well, some said that. 19th century travelers, lots of them noted that this was really an African face, but what they meant is that it's a sub-Sahara African face. It's a real African face. The Nubians are very black, but have more or less finer features. They don't have the jaw like that. I mean, that looks more like an NBA basketball player than an Egyptian.
Right.
Anyway, the headdress is all redone. The picture before, where it was covered with sand,
right?
You see how weathered the headdress was.
They redid the bottom of it,
They redid
right?
the headdress in its entirety. The face itself is a much harder outcrop of limestone, so it hasn't weathered to the same extent that the body of the Sphinx has weathered.
So you think it's of the same era?
We don't know. Actually, because you see, the African face is a real problem. Actually, of course, the Egyptians are as prejudiced as everyone else, and they don't want to actually believe that the Sphinx itself could be a sub-Saharan African, maybe from an earlier period when the Africans were pharaohs. We don't know.
Wasn't there some speculation that initially it was an actual lion's face and that the lion's face was cut down to create this pharaoh's face?
That's us speculating that way, because the head is way too small for the body. And it certainly, and we had the NYPD, we did this big study. I think that's the next slide coming up. Yeah, there it is. There you see with Frank Domingo, who was the NYPD.
Sketch artist?
Well, he was a senior forensic artist for the NYPD. It's a guy who knows about physiognomy. So he did a study of the comparative faces of the Sphinx and of the Sphinx. That's the one on the right. And Pharaoh Khafra, his conclusion was that no competent artist or sculptor could possibly have used the same model for the face of the Sphinx as for the Khafra face. Khafra face, and there's a few Khafra faces floating around. So my criminal partner, when Frank gave us that study, his comparative study, Boris Said, said, for the academic establishment, this is bad news and worse news. The bad news is that there was an Atlantis, and the worst news is they were black. My black friends like that phrase. But anyway, so and in the 90s, I did an op-ed piece for the New York Times, and I carefully left that part out. I just used the Frank Domingo's drawing versus the Sphinx. But a couple of weeks later, a letter was published from an orthodontist who also knows about faces, saying, hey, that Sphinx is actually a sub-Saharan African face. I didn't say it. He said it, so I'm not in trouble for that.
Right.
But anyway, until something better is discovered, it's a sub-Saharan African face, and we don't know when it was recarved, and we don't know when. Okay.
So it's entirely possible that it used to be a lion, and then some pharaoh came along and said, I don't like that lion, make it my face.
No, it may have been that the head was so weathered that over time that they said, well, we can't repair the face the way that we can repair the body, and so they recarved the head.
And of course, the face was most likely still above ground while the rest of the body was covered, so it was subject to more erosion.
Well, it would not. Well, it's also a harder limestone, so probably, again, this is speculation, but we reckon that an outcrop of stone was sticking above the sand level to begin with, and somebody at some point, a jillion years ago, decided to carve the Sphinx by cutting around it, cutting the bedrock away from around it, leaving the outcrop above and carving that into whatever it may have been originally. Could have been an African queen. Could have been.
How much information did they lose when the Library of Alexandria was burned?
Well, since it was burned, we don't know.
I mean, it's amazing, though. Really?
We
Could
don't
you
know.
imagine?
1 million scrolls. It was bragged that they had 1 million scrolls. Who knows what was on them?
God.
One of my dreams, not dreams, but sort of vision, whatever, but hope is that one of these days somebody turns over a spade in Damascus or in somewhere up there and discovers a cache of hidden scrolls from the Library of Alexandria. It's quite probable that the so-called maps of the sea kings, the Piri Reis map and some of those other things, are copies of maps that were originally part of the library. And I have a whole film script, actually.
What's the latest on this supposed chamber that they found under the paws of the Sphinx? There's been some radio...
No, us. That's us.
Yeah.
It's the seismograph that says that
Right.
there's a chamber there. And the seismograph doesn't channel, and it doesn't... and the geophysicist who did it said, yeah, there's a void down there. Now, does that mean that it could be a natural void that's certain kinds of limestone that's riddled with those kinds of voids, but this isn't that kind of limestone. So more stuff when the opposition finally caves in and says, they never say they're wrong, and says, well, this deserves further study, then maybe we get permission to go and really look back into that, stick a probe down or something like that and see if there is indeed something in there. We don't know.
God, that seems like an important thing.
Could be.
I mean, just to find that there's something there.
Just to find there's something there is important, yes.
Now, has there ever been any discussion whatsoever about... I mean, I know they've done all this repair work on the Sphinx. Has there ever been any discussion of taking the limestone that was pulled from the Great Pyramid and somehow or another putting new limestone back up there to recreate its original look?
No, nobody has ever talked about that as far as I know. But it would be a nightmarish job because all of those core blocks are all crumbly and uneven damaged and stuff like that. And besides, they have other fish to fry. They've got technology to worry about. And stuff
I know,
like
but
that.
I mean, just if people could see what it used to look like. I mean, whoever did that when they raided it to build Cairo, like what?
That's what they say. I'm not even 100. I've never seen a study that actually has documented where those stones are. And they're big, massive stones, and they slope like this. You can't build a bridge out of those stones. You'd have to cut the edge off, which is almost as much work as quarrying the stuff out of the raw quarry rock, which is closer to Cairo. So
what do you think happened?
I don't know, but I'm not 100% happy with that explanation. I don't have a better one, but that one is subject to, let's say, question.
Now, has it been firmly established that it was covered in smooth limestone?
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much.
Yes, actually, the Roman, Greco-Roman writers who were there at the time studying talked about it being absolutely perfect and unpenetrable. In fact, one of them said there's a rumor that there was a hinged block at the entrance that if you pushed it, or did something with it, it opened. And I've often thought that I wonder if that's the origin of Open Sesame in the 1001 Nights, because there are certain of those 1001 Nights tales that have their origins in ancient Egypt.
Wow.
That would be a good study. Go ahead, keep going.
What else we got here?
That's the head of Khafra with the falcon.
Wow, very different face.
They're totally different face. I mean, you can't miss that. And there's more long story, but we're already going over here, and I won't go into it. Okay, here's this water weathering that when Schock took one look at it, said, wow, this looks like they're hundreds of thousands of years old. Just keep going.
Hundreds of thousands of years.
That was his. When the geologist, he wasn't thinking what he was saying.
He was just saying it.
He was just saying it, but it was
massive water erosion.
It was massive water erosion by a guy whose expertise is in that field.
Right.
So if he thought about it, we can't document that until we get a bunch of guys there really looking seriously into it. But
how old do you think it is, if you had to guess?
I don't know. Because of the way it's oriented, one of the reasons they come out with the date, Hancock and Boval originally came out with this 11,500 because as a processional marker, because that would be the time as a lion, that would be the time when it last saw its own image in the sky, Leo the lion, the constellation of Leo. That would have been the last time, I think, not that there's too much that's going on, it's in too chaotic a stage to have been done then. And I think it may be the age before that, which would be about 36,000 BC, which would correspond with the Egyptian texts themselves. However, that said, it wouldn't surprise me if it were older still.
Wow.
Until we get a bunch of geologists and experts in their various fields to see if they can put a fix on it, and they might not be able to. But that's one of the things we look forward to doing if we get permission to go back in there, get the funding, very important, and the permissions to go there and actually get this done. And this is where actually we were just in Egypt when I climbed up and down the pyramid myself at 84. And we got, complicated story, but we did get to meet the new Minister of Antiquities, and who was very cordial and kind of listed the things that we had to do in order to get formal position. But in any way, we established a personal contact with him, which was very useful. And then we also met up with the director of this new gigantic museum that they're building and that is going to open in a year or two ago. And he was very open to anything, even controversial, that they could apply science to. So if some of the other pieces of this trip didn't go as planned, we couldn't get to see some of the things we wanted to see for complicated reasons. But anyway, that we established the potential foothold for getting the next stage of work accomplished.
That's very, very promising.
That's promising.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but they think that people in this form, the form of you and I, have only been around for somewhere around 300 to 500,000 years. Is that right?
Well, that's the current thinking.
The current thinking?
Well, and it changes all the time.
Yeah, it changes. So let's bring it back. Let's go crazy and say it's 1 million years old. When you're looking at something like this and you're talking about 36,000 years, boy, that's it's just crazy to think that there was this period where people were just throwing shit at each other and throwing pointed sticks at animals and kind of barely getting by, and then something like this just sort of erupts out of the imagination and the ingenuity of people that lived tens of thousands of years ago.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be that difficult, because as you keep going through the slides, you'll get to the Paleolithic caves.
Now, that's more evidence of water erosion, correct? What you're looking at right there?
No, I'm talking about the painted cave.
But right there with this image, right there, same image.
That's the same. That's the same water weathering.
It's just another view of it.
That's the back end of the Sphinx.
Okay.
And that's interesting. Anyway, part of Mark Lehner's theory is that, it flaked away, over time, and that's what's responsible for the curved profile. But this is a tomb that's been cut in. It's old. It's not Old Kingdom. It's what's called Late Kingdom, but it dates from about 600 or 700 BC, and those are the masons' marks, still as original. So for 2,600, over 2,500 years later, still perfectly visible. So no. Theory exploded.
Well, that definitely puts a damper on the wind and sand erosion theory.
Well, that too, absolutely.
Yeah, but especially considering that they still think the Sphinx is 26 or 2,500 BC.
Yeah. Well, listen, this is. Remember, as I said, the second strongest thing in the world.
Yes.
And this is not. You don't trifle with them. And if you think that just because the evidence is good enough, they're going to accept it. No, they're only going to accept it when you beat them into the ground sufficiently so that they can't get up.
Well, as long as their reputation is staked on their original assumptions being correct, there's going to be a problem.
Oh, and so there is.
Yeah.
Right.
So what are we looking at here?
This is the corner of Khafra Pyramid, and you see the two very different styles of architecture. The huge blocks below, very finely dressed, and the much cruder core masonry up above. This is evidence of two separate stages of construction. It's like if you bought a Victorian house with an IKEA kitchen in it, you wouldn't say, "Oh well, they just decided to build this Victorian house and put this cool new kitchen in." No,
Right.
you know in 2 seconds that it's two different stages of construction. Anyway, we got a lot of stuff to cover here. They're here. We'll stop. You see where these people are walking?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that this one block? You see those people?
Yes.
There, and then all the way down where the third guy down there is walking, there's another, it goes down to there, and then
So
it goes.
it's like a 20-foot plus
It's
block.
about 20 by 30 foot block.
Wow.
And then do the next slide. That's what it is, edge on. Those are the blocks. People walking on top, that's what we were just looking at. So those blocks are about between 6 and 8 feet thick.
Go back to the bottom one. So not only they're 6 and 8 feet thick, but they're stacked on top of each other.
That's right, to build it up to that level.
Wow.
Yeah.
6 and 8 feet thick, and then stacked on top of another one that's of a similar height.
And if you go poking back into it, you see the joints between them are pretty rough. But in fact, if you poke back in there, you see that they fit together, that you barely get a credit card between them. That's lots and lots of weather over lots and lots of years. Then those are the blocks of the Great Pyramid, which are much smaller, and almost presuppose a later state of construction. Yeah, those are the same. Okay, that's the Red Pyramid. We're going to take up too much time here. Keep going. Okay, that's the interior of the Red Pyramid, and you see that's a megalithic construction. It's always called a plundered tomb chamber. A, it's not a tomb chamber because nobody was ever found in it. It doesn't look like any Egyptian tomb chamber. And B, it's not plundered. It's simply ruinous. This is an earlier construction that, for whatever reason, the builder of the Red Pyramid decided to incorporate that into his pyramid. It's not like an IKEA kitchen incorporated into the Victorian house. It's something that was there before and that they built the pyramid on top of.
So there's some older construction and then a better, more... Stay up there, Jamie. Stop moving. So what you're seeing, the lower, cruder level, is an older method of construction. Then above it, you see like really smooth.
Yeah, much old. Well, and also you see really smooth because it's in perfect shape. There's nothing. It's the inside of the pyramid. Nothing could do. It's like it was done yesterday. Whereas the bottom has been out in the weather for a long time. That's the secret. It's weathered by. It's weathered. Not like the exterior of the Sphinx, but its style is typically megalithic. It looks like certain of the constructions in Ireland and Scotland and Wales, the megalithic constructions there.
So you mean like a cruder cutting?
Much cruder, but dating from an earlier period, 7,000 BC, something of that
So much
nature.
like when they go and do excavations in Mexico City, they're building like buildings down there, and they have to stop construction because they find like some ancient pyramid or something along those lines.
Exactly.
So what this is they had an old structure and they built the new stuff on top of it. The new stuff is what we think of as the original structure, but there's evidence to point that there was some ancient stuff below that.
Exactly.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, and what do we got here?
That's more just other shots of shocking myself in there. Okay, this is another piece of the puzzle. This is part of Abydos, behind the temple itself. Temple is off to the right. And this is, again, a good friend of mine has just done an elaborate book on this. And even though he's not an Egyptologist, it's being academically published. But it's going into all sorts of things having to do with this strange structure, which is one of the most resonating, powerful places in all of Egypt. We are convinced, Shock and myself, that those central pillars date from a much earlier period, and then the rest of the temple is Seti I, which is about 1300 BC. But this is too elaborate to get into here, and I'm running out of words.
Why do you think that it's older?
The
construction method?
Style of construction, mostly style of construction, and the way that it's sited, sort of buried into the ground, which is almost unheard of for an Egyptian temple to be constructed into as a subterranean structure. It would have had a roof over it and so on at some point or another. But anyway, it's a complicated issue. There it is. It fills up with water sometimes, and now they won't let you in down there. But anyway, and this is we'll go
Scuba
through this
divers.
This is us actually at Yonaguni.
Oh, in Japan.
Shock and myself and Hancock and the Graham still now he's getting a bit more cautious about it. But we went there, financed by this mega millionaire Japanese industrialist. Really, I mean, he wanted to prove the existence of Lemuria. And as you see, I mean, all of those geometric looks there. And Jacques and I came to the conclusion after a week of diving there that seductive as it looks, it really is a natural, entirely a natural way. And we could even see, we don't have the pictures of it because it was the last day we were there, you could even see the way that it was formed by the nature of the rock and the action of the waves and the terrific tides that prevail there. Mm-hmm. So this is what that's me, you can tell.
So you actually did the diving down there. How old were you when you did that?
Oh, when was that? 10, 12 years ago?
That's pretty gangster.
In my 70s, what?
It's pretty gangster.
Yeah, well.
Get down the bottom of the ocean when you're 70,
well,
checking out rocks.
Well, and I don't like being underwater either, but for archaeology, I'll do it. Okay, keep going. Oh, well, this is the famous cartouche that some people think is here. These are the Paleolithic caves. This is the best of them, called Chauvet. This is dated.
This is in France, right?
This is in France. And this they date, not us. They date to 31,000 BC or older. This is genius stuff. Great artists did this. Great artists are not primitive. They might be shooting arrows at rhinoceroses to eat, and why not? It's a lot better than going to the supermarket. And organic, or you never heard of a GMO rhinoceros. But this is fabulous work. And who knows what was going on the rest of the time when they're doing this in the dark, hidden away in these caves. And this is 31,000 BC. So the date for us of 36,000 or thereabouts for the Sphinx and all of that is not as out of the question as you think, because they date this to 31,000, and this presupposes an extremely sophisticated artistry, and supremely sophisticated artistry is not done by morons or by primitives. It just isn't. Keep going. Look at this great stuff.
Yeah, they definitely had a very good sense of how to capture what these animals that they worshipped and went after looked like. But it was crazy here. You see, that looks like a rhino down there and horses.
It is. And the horses, wild horses.
Wow.
Well, maybe not.
So this is Göbekli Tepe,
that's
right?
That's the artist's study of Göbekli Tepe.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they've only uncovered less than 10% of Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, much less. I think it's 5%, something like that. And now it's near the Syrian border, so God knows what they're doing, but they're covering it over because once they started excavating it, been protected by the fill for all of these thousands of years, and it started deteriorating. So now unfortunately, you can no longer see it the way that Jacques and I saw it 6-7 years ago.
So what are they covering it with?
Oh, they've got sheds and roofs over it, and it's completely destroyed. It's magic, but I can't blame them if the weather is getting at it.
Well, when did they discover this?
It was actually discovered in the 90s, 94 or so, and they've been working on it ever since. And it only came into public view around 2004 or thereabouts. And here's some of the detail, and this is why Jacques is fascinated by this, because that kind of thing of the anthropomorphic, of the hands grasping around the corner, they're doing that, or something almost identical to that in Easter Island. We think Easter Island plays a role in this whole lost civilization hypothesis.
Wow.
And that's more. Again, this is raised relief. You have to chop the stone, cut or abrade the stone away from the figures. This is tough to do.
It's 3D stuff. And
That's
also, aren't there animals depicted on these things that aren't even local? They're not even available on that continent, nor do they think there's a history of these animals?
I am not sure. But this one is that one there is a kind of a feline of some sort. Hard to tell exactly what it is because it's stylized.
Right.
But it's a pretty brilliant piece of sculpture, and you have to, carve away the whole stone surface in order to get at that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they know or surmise what that is.
Yeah, it definitely looks like some sort of a
like
cat.
a puma, some sort of a puma or something. This is interesting. That's a bead that they found there from Göbekli Tepe, and this is a big mystery in a small bead. Because how did they drill that hole? It's a very, very, very hard stone.
Very hard stone, a very small stone too, because this is sitting in your hand.
That's about the size of the last digit of your thumb.
Yeah, it's tiny.
It's tiny and it's thin.
And so there's a tiny little hole in that.
Right.
And again, we're talking about a time where there was no steel.
That's right.
So how did they do that?
Exactly.
Well, there's a bunch of pottery in Egypt in terms of carved stone pottery,
right.
where they have zero idea how they constructed it with a very thin lip, and then it goes inside contoured.
Yeah. I think we have one of those there. This is a bracelet found recently in Turkey, made of obsidian, which is an almost impossible stone to work with. And the ridges on it, they, again, not us, have found by doing a careful study of it geometrically that it's very sophisticated geometry at work. I forget exactly what it is that's at issue here, but it's not just a couple of cavemen saying, well, my wife is pissed off at me, so I better give her something nice for our anniversary. So I said, well, here's a nice chunk of obsidian. I think I'll do a little bracelet for her. And
do they know how old this is?
Yeah, it's dated by the strata that it's found in around 8,000 BC.
Wow.
Okay, this is more stuff. This is Sardinia, which is a treasure of megalithic, misunderstood. Look at these extreme, fantastic structures. We think, Shock and myself, that a lot of this may be in answer to this massive coronal mass ejection that happened maybe thousands of years earlier even, and people are still building things to keep them safe from another one of these.
Now, what would be the effect of a coronal mass ejection?
Right now?
Yeah.
A catastrophe.
Right, now it would kill the satellites, and there'd be a lot of issues.
It would freeze the
grid.
It would fry the grid.
Right.
I mean, instantly the only people who would survive are the survivalists. Who are off the grid to begin with.
And those are all assholes.
Well, those kinds of survivalists.
The real problem.
Yeah, those kinds of
preppers.
But other people are off the grid, doing. My pal Clay, who's here, is buying 10 extra acres that I have that I'm not doing anything with, and is planning to, in fact, do exactly that, to go off the grid and build a permaculture, 10-acre self-sustaining little
That's
farm.
a great way to do it, to have like a farm, and if you could afford the land and have solar power and all that jazz, and well water.
Few people are doing that.
It's a great way to do it if it's possible.
There are some people, but when the world is overpopulated to the extent that it is, it's not going to get to an awful lot of people very quickly. It's difficult to do. Yeah, these are the interior of those extraordinary nuraji, they're called. Sardinia is an incredible place, actually.
And that's in Italy, right?
Well, island off the coast of Italy.
Wow. What do they date these to?
Well, they date it to 2600 or so, 2600 BC, and Shock and I question that, but we don't have any data that tells us otherwise.
What is that?
This is the stone circle in Egypt, the Nabta Playa, as it's called, that looks completely fragmented and rough. But in fact, even this, the academics, the archaeoastronomers, acknowledge is astronomically oriented, and there's a physicist, an archaeoastronomer named Tom Brophy, who studied it much more carefully and has found much more sophisticated alignments than just solstices and equinoxes. Again,
that's a common thread in ancient architecture, which is really fascinating, is the alignment with celestial bodies.
Always.
The Mayans were big on that. Yeah.
Always. Well, what they're doing, back to precession, for whatever reason that we don't understand, but with the evidence is there, and festivals and all sorts of things like that are attuned, take place at these critical, let's call them energy points. And what they're doing, and it's quite clear that they're doing it, is that they're orchestrating their entire civilization. They're tuning their entire civilization to the movements of the heavens. This is quite clear, and this you can kind of demonstrate. What they're achieving by that, we don't know. But it's very important to them.
What do we got here?
More of the same.
That's the devil's dick. What is it?
Well, close.
Looks like it.
Yeah, that's Nabda-Playa, and that's just the drawing of Nabda-Playa, and this gets into complications of the cosmology of it. This is the Dogon. This is the work of my good friend Laird Scranton, who you may know of, I think. Yes.
Yes. And the Dogon tribe, that's the tribe that thinks that they come from the constellation Sirius?
Well, or who think they got their knowledge, yes, that
Yeah.
it comes to them directly from Sirius. I don't think they come from Sirius.
Oh,
They might.
okay.
I'm not sure. But anyway, Laird work started out just as a sort of amateur thing, looking into the cosmology of the Dogon, and at a certain point he decides to see how that matched current technology. He's a techie guy. He's a expert in computer languages and things like that. So he's very good at this kind of work, and he finds that in the first book of his called Science of the Dogon, that this Dogon cosmology of this rather simple tribe in Western Africa, Mali I think it is, has their cosmology, which is they know about, they can transmit it, is in fact consistent with the latest wrinkles in string theory and torsion theory and high energy physics and all that sort of stuff. And then that led him to the study of other civilizations, and he's now 6 or 7 books into it. And really what he's doing is it's unrecognized except by a handful of people. They're not bestsellers, and they're written very well. It's very, very simple and easy to follow. He's showing that this complex cosmology is understood and expressed by every society, virtually every society that he's looked into, including the Chinese. That was a relatively recent book, and he's ending up with a master picture puzzle of all of these ancient civilizations, and there's no dating them exactly, but it's become quite clear through this body of work that the ancients had this effectively the same cosmology and the same understanding of it, and we think that this is a hand-me-down from the ancient civilization that we're busy trying to validate. And
meaning the survivors of this coronal mass.
Survivors of the
people that existed before the coronal mass that had achieved some sort of a high level of sophistication,
yes.
And then these people with whatever knowledge was left over, whatever they had managed to save.
Something of that sort, or they were the same people who were everywhere and had it to begin with.
What you're seeing up here, figure 12.4, the quantum frenzy can cause a string-anti-string pair to erupt and annihilate, yielding a more complicated interaction. What is that?
Well, that's from the physics lab. Actually, they're talking about, I'm not sure if
so this is like some sort of a geometry thing, it's
a physics thing.
And they're looking at, this is Dogon art? Is that what this is?
No, but Dogon art has that figure in it. Keep going.
No, down.
Down, I think. Let's see. Because somewhere the Dogon have that. Well, there's.
Where is it, Jamie? Okay.
No. Nope. I think it's the one right after it. Well, it's very close. Let's see. Anyway. You have to read Laird's book.
Yeah.
Science of the Dogon. It's really all there. And then it's the same in all of the civilizations all over the place. And as I said earlier, I dislike using the Old Testament, the Bible, for scholarship, because it's a minefield. You just don't know. You can select from it. I mean, the Inquisitors found a way to justify the Inquisition from the Bible, and you can justify just about anything.
Well, there's so much craziness in there.
There's so much craziness going on in there. But one thing that did strike me, and our correspondences, one of the intriguing bits of I forget where it is, Tower of Babel, if it's Exodus or, no, it can't be Exodus. Genesis maybe. Anyway, one of the early books of the Bible where they talk about the Tower of Babel. And one of the lines that's very suggestive is before the tower was built, all of humanity spoke in one tongue. Was that the Eskimos spoke the same as the Polynesians? What is this? And the Polynesians spoke Chinese? No, it doesn't seem logical. I mean, the linguists don't find that sort of thing. But if the common language that they spoke was the cosmology, and Laird finds the same cosmology wherever he looks, that's interesting. That's not anything that you can base. You can't be sure of it, but suddenly that strange line does have some corroboration.
I think it's very hard for us to put into perspective what it would be like if there was some sort of a high level of sophistication involved in the society back then, and then they experienced whatever it was, whether it was meteor showers, super volcanoes, asteroidal impacts, whatever it is, and then trying to retain a certain amount of it and pass it on to your children, and how things would get so convoluted and distorted, and there would be very little left.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
something like that.
But the people would be of the same sophistication in terms of the same kind of minds, the same sized brains, the same capability.
Yeah.
They would just have to relearn everything all over again.
Well, there's a good case that can be made for that, because stuff gets after this catastrophe, things really do go into a tailspin, and then around 3000 BC, 4000 BC, all of a sudden, all over the place, very sophisticated civilizations arise, but based upon this ancient knowledge. The mythology is all there to begin with, but suddenly there's Sumeria, and around the same time there's Egypt, there's China, for sure, there's India, and all of these seem to arrive at a very high level of understanding around that 4000 or so date.
Oh, especially Sumer, when they go over some of the ancient, those clay tablets, when they see the depictions of the solar system, that's where it gets really confusing. It's like, how the hell did they know this? How did they know that there was a sun in the center and that all these planets were in the correct size? I mean, they had Jupiter in the correct size, in the correct position, Mars in the correct position. It was very, very strange stuff.
I didn't know that, actually.
Have you ever seen those? Yeah,
no,
beautiful.
No.
Have you ever followed Zacharias Hitchens stuff? He's got some really wacky shit.
Well, it is wacky shit.
Yeah, it's fun to read if you're high.
Yeah, but
the Anunnaki and those from heaven to earth came and created people out of monkeys and alien DNA. And
he's a galactic Darwinian.
Well, he was. Now he's dead. Now he's worm food.
And I call his followers Sitchin-innies.
Sitchin-innies? Well, I read
little use for
the 12th planet. I think that was called the 12th planet.
Horrible stuff. Yes,
but when you don't know anything, it's awesome. But pull up an image, Jamie, of the just to show it to John, of the solar system depiction in the clay tablets, because it's really fascinating stuff. I mean, it clearly shows a sun with what we, our standard sort of image of a sun, where it's a circle and the radiating sort of lines outside of it, and then it has all these planets circling around it. Yeah, there it is, right there. Look at that.
Oh, the sun is a star.
No, it's not a drawing. It's just outlined. That's the actual original clay tablet, but they drew on it as an outline. But isn't that amazing?
Oh.
I mean, you could find the actual tablet, Jamie, too, and you can zoom in on it so you could see it better.
Huh.
But really, really incredible stuff when you consider the fact that they made this somewhere around, what was this, 5000 BC or 4000 BC?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was that one right there.
I don't know if it's that early, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood.
See if you can find a better full version of it there, young Jamie. But incredible stuff and weird stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, they're depictions of people with tails sitting on the laps of giants, and
That tends to decode symbolically,
Mhm.
actually, those hybrid creatures
Turn that
and
thing
stuff
towards
like
your-
that.
there you go.
Yeah. Those most of those things, I think, should not be taken literally.
Right. Like
They-
you were talking about myths.
Yeah, myths, because
Right.
things change shape and one thing becomes another.
Mhm.
And when those are shown pictorially, it doesn't mean that it's to be taken literally.
There's the original, so you can see it there in the background. Pretty interesting stuff, huh?
But where are the in the background? Where?
See right
Oh,
there?
there. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And but the stars, that's the original.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that you have the sun in the middle
Yeah.
of the stars. Actually, that's a motif that you see in Egypt often,
Really?
where you have a star with a solar disk in the middle of it,
Mm.
and often they're just stars. They're 5-pointed stars,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's with a solar disk in it. And what they're talking about, I think the Egyptologists talk about a stellar cult and a solar cult, and that as soon as you call anything a cult, it becomes you can talk about it because it's somebody else's religion,
Right.
and therefore superstition. But what it's talking about, and probably this too, is two levels. In other words, it's the solar sky, our solar system, and the star around it is the zodiacal sky, is the constellational sky. So it's two levels of the hierarchy simultaneously.
Mm. But just amazing that you're talking about such a long, long time ago, and they had all the little planets there.
But they don't have Uranus, and they don't have Uranus.
We'll see what they have there.
Do they?
Pull it back up again, Jamie.
I'm finding a couple of different versions too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So there's more than one version of it.
Yeah, one only had 7 planets. They have another one that has 9. I'll show you.
Ah, that's interesting. If they have
So this one
9.
only has 7.
Right, but that was a different one where that shows a star and then it has a bunch of planets off to the side. Who knows what that means? Go full view on that one, Jamie. Yeah, look at that one. It's just so cool to look at something that someone made,
Yeah.
you know, whatever, 5,000, 6,000 years ago, and
Right.
see their attempt. Go back to that, please. Their attempt at trying to show and convey what they knew about the world, or what their thoughts were about the world. Like, what are we seeing here? Like,
Yeah,
how-
well, see that
looks like
that,
war.
That one is not well. That's a common theme in that's a common theme in Egypt too. The pharaoh smiting in the heads of his enemies. It's the conquest of the forces of light over the forces of darkness. In this one, the 7 might not be. There it is. You have that. As I said, often in Egypt or very similar. But the other one, the star, and the seven planet could be planets, but see, it's a different looking star too. It's many. 1, 2.
Yeah, it's a
3,
different one.
It's
The other
the
one was
7.
6.
It might be a number symbolism thing with the thing and the numbers. So the Egyptians do 7, not as circles like that, but as dots. It's it has a numerical validity rather necessarily than an astronomical one. That one, the other one.
Go back to the other one, Jamie.
Yeah, no, that one's really interesting.
Yeah. All this stuff is interesting.
Yeah,
to
the
me.
relative sizes. That's pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah, and again,
And the two on the outer edge is really those two. Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, very.
That's interesting indeed. I'd like to see that explained any other way than
They knew something.
they sure as hell knew
I mean,
something.
or it's an amazing lucky guess.
No, this is it's not guesswork.
No, it's just unraveling ancient civilization. It's like putting together a puzzle when you only have 5, 6 pieces.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing that when we started out, there were few pieces, and then now a lot of pieces have been added to the puzzle.
Right,
And
like the nuclear glass, the coronal mass ejection stuff.
Göbekli Tepe is a big chunk of
Yeah.
Gunung Padang in Indonesia is another one. I don't have any photos of that, but Shock has been to that and is absolutely convinced that it's very, very that it's human made, and that it's very, very old. So these things are showing up all over the place.
So go back to the slides, and it's such a emerging thing as far as like people talking about it too. The slides.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is something that's being discussed over and over again now. It's much more mainstream, and now that Graham Hancock has got a lot of traction on his work and his new book, Magicians of the Gods, and Randall Carlson, who's an expert on asteroidal impacts, has sort of impacted his work as well, and really sort of made it more interesting because he's provided a context with some historical, like actual scientific evidence of impacts.
Oh yeah.
That go along with it. So what are we looking at here?
That's Göbekli Tepe again. And I'm not. Yeah, not Göbekli Tepe. That's Nabta Playa, but that's one of Shock's slides, I think, and I'm not sure what he's driving at there.
Some sort of constellation in the background.
That's Brophy's, I think. That's Brophy's slides, where he's looking for much more sophisticated information in Nabta Playa, and even if his more far out speculations are just speculation, I think they could be. Just the basic premise is already of great significance. That this is, because this is dated to 5,000-6,000 BC, so that makes it the oldest datable stone circle.
Now, one of the things I was going to bring up with you, I forgot when we were talking earlier about this idea of the precession of equinoxes, the wobble of the Earth being caused perhaps by a dwarf star that we don't know exactly where it is. That was one of the theories about whatever it is outside of the Kuiper Belt, that there's this object out there now that they're 90% plus sure exists, and they're calling it, Planet X or whatever it is. They think that it's at least 4 times larger than the Earth, and it's somewhere outside of the Kuiper Belt, which is now what they believe Pluto's a part of, right? Pluto. When Pluto's no longer a planet, it got listed as an asteroidal.
Well, poor old Pluto.
Poor
It
Pluto
got downgraded.
Got the shaft.
Right. But
they think there's something out there, and one of the theories that I had read was that it could be some sort of a dwarf star that exists so far out there that we can't see it. A brown dwarf.
Yeah, well, this is, Walter Cruttenden, who started CPAC, would be, I don't know, I wonder if he knows about that. I'll be seeing him in a few days. And some interesting stuff going on at CPAC. It's strange you didn't know about it.
Well, you know about the planet that they're pretty sure of, right? Do you know about that?
I think.
Well, let's see if you can find that. Like they think that somewhere outside of Pluto that there is a large body. They don't know what it is. They don't know exactly how big it is, but they think it's far larger than the Earth. At least 4 times larger than the Earth. Mm-hmm. And that it exists, and its gravitational effect is having a response. Here it is. New dwarf planet discovered far beyond Pluto's orbit. No, Jamie, that's not it. I don't think. That's a dwarf planet. This is something that's much larger. This is like, they think it's larger than Earth. Just look up planet 4 times larger than Earth, believed to be outside of the solar system. They think it's a part of the solar system, but it's on this gigantic orbit, like way, way, way out there. So most of them are binary star systems, right? Most of them?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Jacques would know that. He knows his astronomy a lot better than I do.
But it's interesting if there is some sort of a star or a dead star out there, like way out there.
Yeah.
And that it's affecting us. It's causing our Earth to wobble.
Maybe, yeah.
Here it is. Astronomers say not Neptune.
Neptune's
is that it?
Lurks there.
Is that it?
Well, Neptune's big. So it could be.
Yeah, it might be it. It's January
20th.
Yeah, okay, that's right.
I didn't see that one.
The claim is the strongest yet in the centuries-long search for Planet X beyond Neptune. The quest has been plagued by far-fetched claims and even outright quackery. But the new evidence comes from a pair of respected planetary scientists. I don't want to say that guy's name.
Yeah, look at the language. Yeah. it's quackery if they don't agree and if it's not one of their own. And if it's one of their own, it's respected until somebody comes along and shows that they're wrong.
Right,
And-
but their language is tempered by guys like Zacharias Hitchin, isn't it?
Well, yeah, he brings it on himself. That's right.
Right.
But some of their stuff is equal. That's why I call them the quackademics, because every week there's something coming along disproving stuff that they've been insisting has been right for the last 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Look at this thing.
But they're never quacks.
They think it orbits the sun every 15,000 years.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
Wow. That's awesome. I mean, it's so interesting. We know so much, but so little at the same time. You know, I think it was Dennis McKenna had this great saying that when the bonfire of, how did it work? The bonfire of understanding grows, it illuminates the surface area of ignorance.
Well, good line.
Yeah,
Yes.
that you realize, like, the brighter the light, like, wow, there's so much you don't know.
And then also, you have to distinguish between knowledge and understanding.
Yeah.
For example, with the quackademic Egyptologists, they have a lot of facts at their disposal that they do not understand at all. And that's why, I mean, my own work, Schwaller's own work, couldn't have been done without all of that careful factual work by the Egyptologists. And what I do, or what we do, I mean, those of us who are looking into this, we take that factual material and Schwallerize it. And that gives us a certain degree of understanding, which those jerks don't have at all.
Those jerks. Let's go back to the slides. What else you got here that you want to show us?
I don't know. There's a lot, but some stuff I want to skip.
Okay.
Go ahead, keep going. I want to skip stuff now because I'm running out of words, which is hard to do. That's one of those very hard stone vase with this thin lip, and the walls of the vase are about as thick as the rim of the lip. And this is all made out of one piece of a very hard stone called green schist. And we think, actually, Shock and myself, and it was an idea by another friend of mine, a very good writer named Paul William Roberts, was his suggestion that, hey, maybe these stone things, because there are quite a few of them, date from the earlier period and were kept as sacred objects all of those years. And, of course, if they were kept and guarded and not broken, when a hammer breaks it, but were kept in one piece, you know, X number of thousand years, they wouldn't be weathered or anything. They'd be fine as long as they were protected.
Now, is there any speculation whatsoever as to the method that they used to create something like this?
Well, there's some stupid ones.
Let's hear the stupid ones.
Well, that they're shown with bow drills that, you know, that go where like you light a fire with sticks like this. Well, it's a kind of a drill that they put in there with balls of some kind of, you know, hard stone. And once you get the drill thing down, you can kind of work your way around and gradually hollow out the inside. This seems insane to me, and that it would take, I mean, one of those guys should devote his life to taking a block of green schist and trying that method and see how far he gets in 10 or 15 years. It's very hard to imagine that they could do that with a method like that. But otherwise, no one knows.
But isn't that like sort of, doesn't it balance out with the insanity of building a pyramid in the first place? I mean, building a pyramid is just an incredible undertaking. Didn't they say that, like, if you cut and place 10 stones a day, it would take you 664 years
to... It is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
But in fact, it's quite clear that they did it. It's not at all clear that they did it in the allotted 25 years or something of the sort. Why they did it, I mean, again, to an academic, the only possible explanation is that they were tombs, even though there's no evidence whatsoever that they were tombs. But if they say they were tombs, they don't need evidence.
What do you think they were?
I don't know.
Right.
Except what I'm pretty sure is that they weren't tombs, and they weren't tombs only. My general sense of it is that since everything in Egypt has as its focus the quest for immortality in some way, shape, or form, they enhance that quest. They make it possible to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. I can tell you, you get enough people together and come on a trip or come on your own. When we do our 2-hour meditation in the pyramid, you come out of there knowing that you've not been just in a quiet bathroom. this place surges with power. And you got a group of people in there, all of whom are, especially if they're some who have practiced some meditation. It's really something. And I mean, you come out of there knowing that you've experienced something that you've not experienced before. So how they were used and to what end, I don't know. I mean, this is a quite common theory that there were sites of high initiation. Well, there are sites of high initiation, and when you understand what initiation involves, that's not a dumb theory. It is a dumb theory if you don't think there's such a thing as initiation, and if you think that illumination is dependent upon electricity, well, you'll not be able to think Egyptian. But if you've been to the places and have experienced for yourself the power of these places, then explanations of that sort, even though they don't count as, I mean, they're speculative for sure, but when you don't have any evidence for them being tombs, that's pretty speculative too.
Right. And building them is incredible beyond belief. Lighting them up is only slightly less incredible.
Yeah, the whole thing is mind-boggling.
Now, do you have any theories at all as to how they could build some sort of a stone thing like this?
No, I don't.
Pretty incredible stuff.
But let's go, because we got a lot of stuff, and I don't want to take that. Okay, that's us and my criminal partner, Boris, swinging the digital sledgehammer, looking for underground caverns.
So what you hit that thing, and it makes a sound? And
it's a seismograph. The sound goes into the earth.
Interesting.
The next slide is what we found. And there it is, see, A. That is a cavern or a chamber or of some sort. It's a void underneath the bedrock. And that's the so-called Hall of Records. People think that's Edgar Cayce is talking about. We're iffy about it. Other than that, the seismograph does not know how to channel. So it just says what's there. And
so it knows there's a void.
It knows there's a void. And at the very back, it's a little bit, see, it's the edge of the sea. See, at the very end by the rump, that is also a chamber. And that's absolutely, it's known that it's there. And this gives you the same profile seismologically.
But there's no known way to get into these things?
Yeah, the back one, there's a way. It's a very rough-cut chamber. And there's just behind there, one of those stones, if you pull it away, and you can get in, and it's a room, rough, it's very rough, but about the size of the room that we're in here, the studio. And that's a room. So if that's a room, then it stands to reason, that seismographical reason anyway, that A is also a cavern or a grotto or a construction or something.
So what we're looking at with A, when you see all those circles around it and the rough shape of it, that's the shape that they believe the room is. So it would be similar to the one that's at the rump, where it would be like kind of a rough room.
Well, the seismographic, those are the, I forget, topo lines or something that give you the depths that the thing is at.
But it's not like a square 90-degree angle cut.
It's roughly rectangular, says Tom Dobecki, who is our geophysicist who was doing that work.
So what's the holdup as far as examining that?
Well, two. One, they don't want to be wrong. Two, that it's very difficult to do. It's under about 15 feet of bedrock, that cavern. The Sphinx is, probably the most, let's say, the archaeological hotspot of the universe. I mean, nothing is more open to, excitement and all the rest of it as the Sphinx. Secondly, the water level has risen so that whole chamber is probably filled with water now. So anything that isn't stone would have been obliterated long ago.
Imagine if you got down there and you found wet scrolls.
Well, maybe, or stone something or another.
Right.
But in theory, you could put a little fiber optic something down there and study it. But they don't want to be wrong about this. And anything invasive, the Sphinx is really in disastrous condition. So any little vibration or something like that could conceivably damage it. I don't worry about these things. The geology is much more important as far as I'm concerned. And my guess is that when we finally break open the portcullis and capture all of the quackademics that it protects at the moment, which, I don't know, maybe we'll waterboard them. But anyway, we capture all of the quackademics and get them the hell out of there. At that point, when it is when it is accepted, and these things do happen. This is this idea whose time has come. When it has come, things change, and at that point, maybe then the funding shows up, and the determination comes up to actually look into that void or chamber and see if it is indeed a void or chamber and if there's something in there.
Is it possible that there's some other things in Egypt that haven't been discovered yet?
Oh, load.
Yeah.
They even know where they are, a lot of them, because
Really?
but what do you call it? Landsat, infrared something, when you can photograph underground.
Mm-hmm.
They have, there are hundreds of sites that they know where there are graves and,
Wow.
tombs and stuff like that. But most of them, I don't think that kind of photography, I bet there's a name for it, I don't think that kind of photography goes deep enough for us to establish the lost civilization. It'll be under the sand level. It'll be at the bottom of the sand level. And so far, at any rate, it doesn't get down that deeply. But they have lots of places to excavate if they had the money.
Okay, let's keep going here.
Keep going. Okay, well, this is Schock's book, and he'll be at CPAC.
Is this a recent book?
That's his last book. Yeah, that's a recent book.
The Role of Solar Outbursts in Our Past and Future. Forgotten Civilizations, the title.
Yeah, very interesting thesis, and backed up by a lot of solid scholarship. And Schock will be at the CPAC, this particular CPAC.
So he thinks it was a solar outburst more than they think it was an asteroidal impact.
He thinks, although they're not necessarily antithetical. The dates, in other words, it could have been
Either or.
I mean,
both.
Schock thinks that it's an impact in the earlier catastrophe that brings on the younger Dryas, the intensification of the ice age, and he thinks that it's the solar outburst that puts an end to the entire civilization and melts all the ice.
Whoa. Wow. Northern Lights. What else we got?
Well, keep going. Just go whisk by here, because this is Anthony Perrott, who's a physicist it's his thing. And here, these are these figures that show up in the electron, through the electron microscope, and that are mirrored by those strange dancing, multi-headed, multi-armed figures at the petroglyphs at the top, usually at the upper registers of the petroglyph facade. Which also mirrors, that's the Rongo script. Schock is fascinated by the so far untranslatable Rongo script.
Where's that from?
Easter Island, which shows as letters, presumably, those kinds of weird humanoid figures.
One of the great mysteries of linguists.
Oh, yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Keep going.
That's the end of it.
Is it?
Yeah, it's the bottom.
Of the whole thing?
Mm-hmm.
Of my whole show?
Yep.
Really?
Yeah.
There was a whole bunch of other stuff that I wanted on. Some stuff I didn't want. I wanted to whisk through. But what was up there, maybe I'll send it to you, is the map of Dumfuckistan, of Greater and Lesser Dumfuckistan, which is very useful. And my 5 cowboys and the graphic of the 5 cowboys, terrific graphic. My stepson found it somewhere online, but it really shows the fun of cowboys in action, which is, as I said, you pick up the daily newspaper or turn on the internet and you see the cowboys at work.
You've been at this for a long time now. You've been at this for many years. Yeah.
Late 60s I came
so
across
from when I
Raleigh.
was born.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was born in 1967.
Well, that's around the time I came across Shwala de Lubitsch, yes. Around then.
Do you feel like people are slowly but surely starting to come around at the concepts of these ancient civilizations being not the primitive people that we've been told, but maybe perhaps really complex?
Oh yeah. Well, a lot of people. The trouble is that the picture is muddied. I mean, the academics are almost as quackademics are as staunch as ever in their delusion, but the trouble is that the whole scenario is muddied, and it's almost unavoidable by ancient aliens and Zecharia Sitchin and a whole bunch of nutcases that think that aliens built the pyramids and all of that sort of stuff. So yes, more people are interested, but how many, the percentage of those that are actually capable of sifting the evidence and intellectually honest enough to accept what stands up to scrutiny and not. Numerically, there are lots more of them than there were, but statistically, they're a very, very small percentage of a very small percentage of the populace that actually care or understand it.
Well,
but it only takes a certain small percentage.
Have you ever tried to get your Magical Egypt series on Netflix?
No, not on Netflix, but they probably wouldn't take it because they'd have to make, A, you have to cut a really lousy deal with them, and B, the numbers probably wouldn't justify it.
I don't know about that. Well, they love documentaries, and why would you think that they would want to cut a lousy deal?
They do. I mean, they really don't give you much. I mean, the mystery of the Sphinx is on there, but it's the guy who does the reproduction of it that negotiated with him. And Chance, the downside of Chance is that he's a bit paranoid about letting stuff out of his control. So I've told him, it's got that thing on Netflix, or
Yeah.
But I mean, people have stolen it, and it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
In a very, it's that the reproduction, you really don't see it unless you actually own the DVD.
Right.
But it's Chance's baby as far as pitching it, and he doesn't, and it's not.
So he hasn't even brought it up to Netflix?
I don't know if he has or not.
It seems like it would be right up their alley.
You would think, but I've given up sort of arguing the case. If he doesn't, it's his baby.
Yeah, but it's not. I mean, it is and it's not, but it's a big part of your work. I mean, I just think that would be a great venue for it.
I think it would be too, but you write him and tell him that.
Okay. Well, I have a Netflix
He's
comedy
been trying,
special
he's
coming
been
out.
trying to get on your show for a while.
Has he been?
Well, he's been emailing you a couple of times, and
Oh, he's probably
nobody
emailing the wrong address.
Well,
so.
and nobody responded, so he gives up. Anyway,
I never got any emails from the dude. We'll
I'll
talk
tell him.
about that after the show. We'll try to figure that out. But I got a comedy special coming out on Netflix in October.
Yeah?
I'd be happy to talk to them and say, hey, this is something you guys should look at.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Wow.
I don't have any idea what kind of deals they cut in terms of documentaries, but what I do know is that what you did is amazing, and then I think that it would be great for everybody to have more access, because
I agree.
Just the sheer depth of the information when you go over like the temple and man and all the different. The different incredible structures that exist in Egypt that most people don't even discuss.
Oh, they don't know about, and they don't want to discuss it. But chances, I mean, that's, the way to really watch. People have told me this. Me too. I mean, I'm not much into even dope. I casually smoke it once in a while, but I'm not much. Vodka is my vice, such as it is. I don't even consider it vicious. But watching that. A couple of tokes, to watch Magical Egypt with a couple of tokes, because it slows things down. The editing on that is breathtaking.
Yeah.
And there's a hypnotic quality to it. It's really, I mean, it's an extraordinary achievement. And Chance did it on a zero budget, and doing all of the photography. I mean, everything single-handed on nothing. It's really the heroic production. And we made nothing out of it. Nothing.
Well, let's try to get it on Netflix. I really want. I'm going to try to make an attempt. So when
you attempt,
yeah, I will. I'm going to try to make an attempt. I'm going to bring it to them and have a conversation with them.
Yeah.
I just think
give them a copy.
They might not even know. I mean, I guarantee they don't.
They probably don't know.
I really think it's one of the great works. I
do
really
too.
I think it's amazing, and it's so in depth. It's so in depth that the only way you could do it was to self-produce it.
Yeah. You couldn't get anyone to do that.
Nobody would go. You're going to do 8 DVDs on.
I know.
What are you, out of your mind? Nobody's going to watch all that.
Yeah,
I watched it. I watched it like 3 or 4 times.
Lots of people do. I mean, people.
And you have a Magical Egypt too, right?
Well, we're working on it, except
Right.
we don't have the funding. And actually, this is Chance's baby now, because anytime he wants me, I'm there for him. But I'm not in any position to to really help with it because I'm so swamped with my own stuff.
Right. And
But
what
yeah,
would be covered in Magical Egypt too
I don't
that
know.
wasn't?
I don't know. We've got the first one semi-done, but I don't know what he's got in mind. And he's in
Interesting.
Australia, so I don't get to see him at all. And even Skype is not good for in-depth, evening-long conversations.
No, it's not.
So I don't know, but I'll bet if you showed it to Netflix and they expressed an interest, he'd be interested.
Well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that.
Okay.
I'm going to bring them a copy. We're going to see what we can do. 'Cause
Okay.
I think it's one of those things that I really believe that people should see.
Well, that would
and
be
I think
great.
that if you could get it on Netflix and I could tweet it and let the world know and try to get people to spread the word. I think once people see it, they just start, like that Making of a Murderer thing, you know, that caught all that traction entirely because it was on Netflix and word of mouth mostly. I really think that Magical Egypt is one of those things.
Yeah. Well, what I would like to do, actually, and I hope my pal Clay and some other people are going to help me with this, I'd like to get some of my other, when I'm wearing my other hat, my writer's, my bohemian beret instead of my Egyptological pith helmet, because I've got a whole lifetime's worth of work, much of which has been produced, but none of it really commercially successful. And it's just sitting there waiting to get done, and Netflix would be the perfect venue for it if I had something to show them, because they do production. I mean, they're producers now, too.
Yeah,
Netflix.
it's an interesting time. I mean, that's one of the best things about the internet is that something like that can kind of spring
Yeah.
up and become a bigger network than any of the networks on television
Yeah,
now.
that's the upside. Well, the networks are about to die, and good riddance.
Well, it's a silly idea, but it was good back when there was no other ideas.
That's right.
And you had to sit through those commercials and wait for the next segment, and then you watched 10 minutes and the commercials popped on again. You rolled your eyes and
terrible.
waited for the commercials
Right.
again. And all that stuff's nonsense now. You watch
Yeah.
a commercial now, you're like, what is this silly
Yeah.
thing?
Well, the internet's full of commercials, too.
It is. But at least they're usually at the beginning of a video.
No, they
and then,
come in the middle sometimes, too, and things. They're there. But anyway.
Anyway, Magical
But,
Egypt is awesome. You're awesome.
Agreed.
Appreciate you coming
Thank
on
you, Joe.
here. Glad we
So
got a
you.
chance to meet in
Me, too.
in person.
It's a big difference, even though Skype is the next best thing
Yeah.
to three-dimensional meeting. It isn't three-dimensional meeting.
It is not. It
It's
is
fun
not.
to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all of your work, because I think you've done a great service
You're very welcome.
to the world to sort of shine light on this amazing civilization.
Thank you. Well, much appreciated.
All right, ladies
Thank
and
you.
gentlemen, is it. Thank you very much, John Anthony West. Go seek out his work and definitely go buy Magical Egypt. Don't pirate it, you fucks. Go buy it. It's awesome.
Exactly.
All right.
And if you have the money and if you have the wherewithal and the will, get on an Egypt trip.
Get on an Egypt trip
and
with this
soon,
man. Soon.
Because I'm good enough to get up and down the pyramid, but who knows for how long.
Exactly.
So
All right.
strike while the iron's hot.